The soft glow of dawn rested on the blackened rooftops of King's Landing, a city once bright with promise, but now weighed down by the anguish of war. A thin fog slithered along the serpentine alleys, curling through the decrepit boards of the fishmonger's square, drifting toward the broad markets that had lost much of their clamor. The hush of early morning brought little relief to those who had scarcely slept through the night's alarms and the ever-present stench of fear. Word of pitched battles and dragonfire had traveled from mouth to mouth, leaving behind an uneasy tension that roiled just beneath the surface. In a disused courtyard to the west of Flea Bottom, a young boy wrestled with the corner of a ragged cloak, trying to blot out the chill. He was no older than 10, small for his age, with brown eyes made wide by weariness. His breath plumed in pale wisps as he listened keenly for footsteps that might signal trouble. He thought of the last time he had a full belly. It must have been weeks ago. Not since the conflict had taken hold. Not since the men and lords and ladies of House Targaryen had turned on one another, ripping the realm at its seams. Through a half-rotted window in the vacant house behind him, he could see patches of sky streaked with the earliest glimmers of sunlight. The boy guessed it was not yet time for the street vendors to open. In truth, many had fled or gone broke, and the handful left behind sold stale bread, sour wine, and wilted greens that were all King's Landing could muster in these dire times. The boy rubbed his half-growling stomach again, pressing his hand lightly against his ribs. He'd grown thinner in the weeks of mayhem, and he cast a glance toward the main street, as though expecting salvation. He had heard the rumors whispered in doorways and muttered at ramshackle taverns. The Targaryens were at war with each other, the Blacks and the Greens, as folk called them. Queens and princes vied for the Iron Throne, leaving small folk like him caught in the churn of chaos. Dragons soared overhead, sometimes leaving columns of smoke in their wake. The city felt as though it were teetering on the edge of a precipice, one strong gust away from toppling into ruin. Even children knew better than to roam freely, for fear that some soldier or band of cutthroats might snatch them, or that a dragon's fiery wrath might consume them without warning. Behind the boy, the house's wooden door gave a squeal. An elderly woman emerged, stooped at the shoulders, her gray hair tangled and frail, her face etched with the lines of persistent worry. She handed him a crust of stale bread, wordless yet full of care in her eyes. The boy seized it, too hungry to wait. He tore off a bite and chewed with fervor, ignoring the dryness that scratched the roof of his mouth. Before turning back inside, the woman laid a hand on his head. He watched her shuffle back to the gloom of the house. She had lost her own family, he suspected, though he knew not how. Perhaps her children had been drafted or slain, or fled the city. It was no longer unusual to see broken families, scattered across the war-torn realm, bound only by desperation and a shared dread of what might happen next. When the boy ventured onto the cramped street, the slow stirring of the city had begun. A donkey cart rattled past, pulled by an animal that looked as weary of life as the people around it. A passing guard in tarnished mail eyed the boy with suspicion, as though a child might be as dangerous as any foe in these desperate times. The guard said nothing, though, and clanked on through the mud. Everything about King's Landing spoke of tension, an unspoken knowledge that the capital could erupt into violence at any hour. Yet the boy felt something else today, a peculiar tremor in the air. It was as if the sunrise itself hesitated on the horizon, holding its breath before casting its light across the city. For a fleeting moment, he thought he heard a distant thunder, low and ominous. He peered skyward, half expecting to see the outline of dragons overhead, but the pale morning remained empty. Elsewhere in the city, within the grand and twisted corridors of the Red Keep, the higher lords and ladies whispered in hushed voices about signs, omens, and illusions. The Targaryens, divided among themselves, had dragged the realm into a labyrinth of hostility, yet rumors circulated of something even more remarkable. The city was rife with gossip. There had been sightings, strange, impossible sightings, of a man in black plate, astride a dragon whose scales shimmered with silver. Some called it a trick of the light, a hallucination conjured by stress and hunger. Others swore on their forebears' graves that they had seen a figure land beyond the city walls, vanishing near the place where the black water lapped hungrily at the shore. The news of these sightings buzzed in secret corners, half believed or entirely dismissed. But even the uncertain possibility of some new presence in the city was enough to set tongues wagging. People prayed in their own ways that it might be a sign to end the madness that had seized the realm. Some thought it was Rhaenyra, or Daemon, or Aemond, or even Aegon II himself. Yet the rumors insisted it was none of them. A different visage was said to have appeared, accompanied by a towering dragon that emitted a low, thunderous rumble, akin to the land's own heartbeat. In the Red Keep's courtyard, a pair of gold cloaks stood watch with pale faces and anxious eyes. One of them flicked a wary gaze up at the ramparts, as though imagining the walls might come alive. The other twisted his hands on the shaft of his spear. Their posture was rigid, but their breathing gave away the simmering fear that gnawed at everyone's composure. Even as they attempted small talk, mentioning the city's diminishing food supply, the endless demands from lords and ladies who insisted on receiving their rations first, the wind carried an unsettling tension. No one could ignore the fact that Westeros, as a whole, had become a battlefield. The Blacks clung to Rhaenyra's claim, while the Greens championed the boy king Aegon II, or those close to him who manipulated the reins of power. Castles had changed hands in bloody sieges, fields had been scorched beneath dragonfire, and entire villages had been razed to the ground. Every raven that arrived at the Red Keep bore news of skirmishes, betrayals, and shattered loyalties. With each passing day, the horrors of civil war grew deeper, its shadow cast over all. Atop the battlements, a slender figure in fine green silk appeared against the stone. She was tall, her platinum hair braided into an intricate arrangement. Despite her youth, her posture radiated an authority that might have suited a queen or a princess of her house. She surveyed the city spread below, the cluster of buildings straining under the weight of the conflict. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the cool morning air. A swirl of anxiety gripped her insides. She had heard the rumors of an impossible return. Someone said to be older than any Targaryen living, older than the Red Keep's oldest stones. She told herself it was nonsense. A ghost story. The ravings of broken peasants searching for a savior. Even so, her mind kept circling back to the improbable notion. Aegon the Conqueror, come again to quell the madness among his blood. Something about that rumor both thrilled and unsettled her, though she trusted it as little as she would trust a fevered dream. She smoothed a hand over her gown and slipped away from the battlements, leaving the panorama of King's Landing behind. Meanwhile, miles from the city's heart, across the turbulent waters of the Blackwater Bay, a lone rowboat meandered quietly under the faint sunrise. It was manned by 3 riverfolk who wished to trade at the smaller docks. They labored at the oars, pushing against the tide, cautious of the warships or outriders that might seize them on suspicion of espionage. The youngest among them, a lad with hair the color of straw, froze mid-stroke. His eyes grew wide, and he nudged his companion. They caught sight of a dark silhouette drifting high in the sky, half hidden by the pink and gray brushstrokes of dawn. The shape was immense and oddly familiar. A dragon, the men realized. Yet it was not one they recognized, its scales glinting with a peculiar sheen that sent shivers down their spines. They halted the rowboat, each man's mouth hanging open at the silent majesty of the beast above. It skimmed past them, the flap of its colossal wings sending faint ripples across the water's surface. They tried to glimpse the rider atop its back, but only a faint black outline was visible. The presence seemed regal, old, commanding. For a long moment, the men forgot themselves entirely, lost in wonder and dread. Then, as the dragon receded into the distance, the men pressed on with frantic strokes, eager to leave the eerie visitation behind. They would carry the story ashore, of course, passing it to dockworkers, who in turn would whisper it in taverns, until the rumor found its way to the Red Keep itself. Beyond the city and its outskirts, far to the hills where half-burned villages stood silent as graveyards, a solitary rider on horseback wended through the wreckage. The rider's cloak bore faint traces of black and red, though dust and ash had nearly choked out the colors. Under the cowl was a face hardened by heartbreak, eyes that had witnessed the horrors unleashed on those fields. The rider drew a sharp breath, reining in the horse at the crest of a slope. Below, Scattered thatched roofs jutted from ground that had been scorched black. Charred skeletons of houses gave off a smell of lingering smoke. The rider heard the distant cry of crows, and the wind carried a haunting hush through broken windows. Once, this village might have thrived. Its people might have laughed and danced and told tales under a bright summer sky. But the war devoured them all. The rider's grip tightened on the reins. Every direction in Westeros held scenes like this: homes gutted, families torn asunder. Some by the Greens, others by the Blacks. But the cause scarcely mattered to the dead. He guided his horse onward, picking carefully around the debris. A battered signpost, half splintered, bore the name of the village in faint letters. The rider's gaze slid across the sign, remembering a time when such a place was merely a small dot on the maps of the Crownlands. Little did the villagers know how swiftly devastation could descend from the skies. At the far edge of the village, the rider dismounted. Kneeling next to the remains of a building's doorway, he gently brushed aside the rubble. Beneath a warped wooden beam lay what might have been a child's doll, singed and missing one arm. The rider lifted it for a moment, his face reflecting profound sorrow. Then he set the doll aside, rose, and turned his gaze to the horizon. The heartbreak was a spark inside him, fanning from sorrow into a righteous fury that kindled in the pit of his stomach. Scarcely had he pulled himself back into the saddle when the wind shifted, carrying on it a fragrance like storm-charged air. Lightning and old magic, crisp and electric. The horse shivered beneath him, and the rider felt a prickle at the nape of his neck. Slowly, he looked skyward. At first he saw only the faint blue overhead. Then a distant shape took form, moving with the unmistakable power of a dragon's flight. The rider narrowed his eyes. For the span of a heartbeat, the shape cast a vast shadow across the blackened fields. Even from that distance, something about it unsettled the rider. He had seen Targaryen dragons before. He had glimpsed Caraxes, Syrax, Vagar, and others whose names made men tremble. But this was different. A presence that seemed to drag the weight of centuries behind it. An echo of an age that existed in the realm's collective memory. Older than the war. Older than any living Targaryen. The rider tugged the reins to coax his horse away, though his heart pounded with an insatiable curiosity, as though some deep part of him yearned to chase after that fleeting figure in the sky. But the horse was skittish, stomping the ground, urging its master away from the silhouette. So the rider did not linger, spurring the beast forward toward King's Landing, that battered heart of the kingdom, wondering all the while if those rumors might indeed be true. By mid-morning, the streets of the capital had come to life in a subdued sort of bustle, if one could call it that. Street vendors hawked what meager goods they possessed, though few had coin to spare. At the gates, refugees from the outlying villages pressed inward, hoping for some measure of safety. Many carried their entire lives in satchels slung over their shoulders. The gold cloaks tried to maintain order, but tempers frayed easily. More than once, arguments broke out over a spilled basket of onions, or a child accidentally jostling an exhausted mother. Amid that uneasy press of humanity, the rumor crept like a fever. People said Aegon the Conqueror himself, yes, the very founder of the Targaryen dynasty, the Dragon Lord who had wrested Westeros from disparate kingdoms, had returned from the grave. The story twisted and changed with each retelling. Some swore he had been sighted at Dragonstone, others claimed in the Vale, while still others insisted they had seen him riding through the very skies above King's Landing. Knights and lords in the Red Keep dismissed it as pure madness. A ghost would not ride a living dragon, they argued, nor would a king dead these 100+ years simply appear because times were hard. Still, a growing unease took root, for among the Targaryens themselves there were those who dreamed strange dreams, who felt the pulse of a deeper magic in their blood. If not Aegon, then perhaps some forgotten scion or a spirit, conjured up by the realm's desperation. Whatever the truth, no one could ignore the rumors entirely. It was near midday when a hush rippled through a crowded plaza adjacent to the Street of Steel. The blacksmiths had paused in their hammering, the stable hands in their mucking, and a knot of common folk stood with wide eyes, gazing up at the sky. Several heartbeats later, a roar, thunderous and low, reverberated through the air, making the cobblestones shudder. Shopkeepers abandoned their stalls. Children ran to their parents, clutching at skirts and trousers. The sky was bright and clear, but that rolling rumble moved across it like a storm. When a dark shape appeared, gliding low and slow, a collective gasp emerged. Those who had beheld a dragon in flight recognized it instantly, but this beast was one they had never seen before. It had scales black as polished onyx, with silver-white highlights that shimmered in the sunlight. Its wings stretched outward, casting a shadow that spanned half the plaza. People shrank back against the walls, uncertain whether to flee or kneel. The dragon circled once in a wide arc, each stroke of its wings stirring gusts of wind. Then, with a grace that belied its massive form, it descended toward a broad open space near the city's perimeter, where rubble and a collapsed building had created a makeshift clearing. When it landed, the ground trembled. A swirl of dust rose around it. Atop the monstrous creature's back sat a figure in black armor, etched with ancient runes and swirling patterns. The visor of his helm was closed, concealing his face. The man moved with a measured certainty, sliding down the dragon's flank to stand upon the scorched earth. A hush fell over the onlookers. It was as though the entire city held its breath. He lifted his visor, revealing a visage that looked weathered by centuries, yet still regal. Pale hair that betrayed the Targaryen heritage, eyes burning with an otherworldly focus. In the hush of that moment, one might hear the frantic beat of every heart in the vicinity. He did not speak at first, but his eyes swept the crowd, and a profound stillness claimed them. Eventually, one voice broke the silence, a trembling question from a bearded smith who, daring to step forward, asked, "Who are you, my lord?" The man's expression was unreadable. There was a weight in his voice when at last he spoke, as though the syllables of High Valyrian and the common tongue warred for dominance in his throat. "I am Aegon of House Targaryen," he said, his tone low, resonant. "I have returned." A collective shiver passed through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth. A child clung to his father's leg. The blacksmith fell to his knees, mind reeling with disbelief. People muttered prayers, some in shock, others in terror or awe. The name rang out in whispers, Aegon the Conqueror. Could it be true? He made no demands in that moment. Instead, he placed a gauntleted hand upon the dragon's flank and closed his eyes, seeming to commune with the creature in silence. Then, he turned his gaze back to the stunned watchers. "Take me to whoever leads this realm," he said, not raising his voice, but speaking in a tone so certain it allowed no room for question. "And speak no lies. I would know the truth of these conflicts that rend Westeros." Darum. Two gold cloaks had been drawn to the scene by the commotion. They exchanged nervous glances. Finally, one of them stepped forward, voice trembling. "My lord, the realm is in turmoil. The Targaryens are at war with themselves. We can bring you to the Red Keep." Aegon nodded, as though not surprised, only saddened. He moved with an economy of motion that marked him as someone who had once been a warrior king. The onlookers parted before him in silent reverence or alarm, leaving him a clear path. Some dared to follow at a distance, as though compelled by a magnetic aura to witness whatever might unfold next. The gold cloaks, uncertain how to proceed, could not deny this stranger who carried such an air of authority, flanked by a dragon that dwarfed many living beasts in the realm. One of them summoned the courage to ask the question that plagued them all. "Are you truly him?" A flicker passed through the man's eyes. "I am he who united Westeros once," he answered quietly. "Call me a revenant, call me a spirit if you must. I have come because the realm's wails echo across the centuries. Blood of my blood wages war against itself. I will learn why, and I will see if it can be mended. Now remain there." His voice carried just enough sorrow to make even the guard believe, if only for a moment, that this was not some mad pretender. The onlookers clung to that sense of awe, filling in the gaps with their own hopes and fears. Before any could stop him, Aegon continued on foot, the gold cloaks forming a loose escort around him. His dragon prowled behind, sending some scuttling aside in terror. But the great beast soon halted and curled its serpentine neck, deciding to remain in the clearing. Even a gentle wave of Aegon's hand seemed to communicate volumes to the beast. As he strode through the crooked streets, the magnitude of the city's despair rose around him. Rubble from old riots, the tear-streaked faces of children, the hopeless gazes of men who had once been proud. The ravages of war were everywhere, and his face grew graver with every step. He passed the remains of a broken statue. Ironically, one that had been commissioned in his own image generations after his death, and slowed as he regarded the chipped stone that had once been a face. Curious onlookers parted like waves, some crossing themselves or bowing, others hiding behind corners. The name Aegon passed from lip to lip, but whether they believed it or saw him as an impostor, none could muster the courage to confront him outright. His entrance was a quiet storm, filled with the promise of something that could shatter the fragile status quo. When they reached the outer courtyard of the Red Keep, tension coiled in the air like a drawn bowstring. Knights stationed at the gates bristled, their halberds at the ready. More gold cloaks came rushing, uncertain whether to bar his passage or let him through. By then, the rumors had reached them, and a hush spread among those who caught sight of the figure in black armor. He paused at the gates, his gaze tracing the looming spires of the fortress. The Red Keep had been raised on the orders of Maegor the Cruel, Aegon's son, long after the conquest. Yet Aegon seemed to take it in with a tinge of recognition, as though he could see the shape of the old fortress that stood here in his time, an echo of what once was. The air seemed charged, and no one moved until Aegon spoke again. "Who is your ruler now?" he asked, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Tell me, that I might speak with them." A hush lingered until a knight, graying at the temples, finally replied, "There is confusion, my lord. The rightful queen, Rhaenyra Targaryen, holds the Red Keep, though some claim Aegon II is still the rightful king. The city is divided. The realm is divided. Now," a muscle in Aegon's jaw tightened. "Then let me speak to both." Chaos erupted in the courtyard for a moment. Knights and men-at-arms exchanging alarmed looks, uncertain how to proceed. To even mention the possibility of letting this stranger, claiming to be Aegon the Conqueror, address both sides seemed laughable, or else a recipe for violence. But there was something in the man's bearing that made them hesitate to laugh, something dangerously regal. Word was sent inside, up the winding corridors of the keep, eventually reaching those who had the authority to decide. More watchers gathered in the courtyard, forming an uneasy circle around this black-armored figure who did not flinch or pace or fidget. He simply stood, hands folded at his waist, scanning his surroundings with the calm of a man used to commanding armies. At last, the spiked gates groaned open, and a retinue of guards in Targaryen livery stepped out, flanking a tall, silver-haired woman in black garments. Her posture was rigid, her chin held high. She had the look of a queen, of one who had suffered and fought to keep her birthright. The scar lines beneath her eyes hinted at nights of worry. Behind her came a smaller group of advisors, lords and ladies, some in finery patched to conceal the wounds of war, others in steel and leather. She halted a short distance from the black-armored man, her eyes flicking over him with visible skepticism. She seemed prepared to declare him a fraud, yet uncertain how to dismiss the looming presence he radiated. "I am Rhaenyra Targaryen," she said, her voice unwavering. "They tell me you claim to be Aegon the Conqueror." He studied her face. She was proud, fierce, and her words carried the subtle ring of command he recognized from those with the blood of old Valyria. A long pause stretched between them. Then he nodded. "I do not claim," he said. "I am." A murmur passed through her company. Some sneered, others looked frightened or puzzled. Rhaenyra's gaze narrowed, though within her eyes flickered a shred of uncertainty, a primal knowledge that Targaryens sometimes touched upon powers beyond mortal comprehension. She noted the scaled armor, the sword at his hip that hummed with Valyrian steel. She measured the sincerity in his face. "You cannot be," she said softly, trying to maintain a regal composure. "Aegon the Conqueror has been dead for well over a century. Then my bones must lie in the crypts," he answered, voice low. "And yet here I stand, Because the realm I forged is burning. My blood wages war upon itself. I have come to learn why. Rhaenyra's chin lifted a fraction. Because the throne has been usurped. My father named me his heir. My half-brother took the throne upon my father's death, denying me what is mine by right. We battle for the soul of House Targaryen and all of Westeros. He let that settle over him. Something in his eyes darkened. Usurpation, treachery. I have seen it before. Yet Targaryens fighting Targaryens, we are all the blood of the dragon. It is not I who caused this, Rhaenyra said, bristling slightly. I never sought war for its own sake. Footsteps behind her parted, and a broad-shouldered man in a cloak of black and red approached. He had the air of a seasoned warrior and the glint of cunning in his eye. Daemon Targaryen regarded the newcomer with something akin to cool curiosity, tempered by a readiness to draw steel if needed. He observed the man's armor, his stance, as though evaluating a potential rival or ally. I have heard many claims, Daemon said, his tone edged. Pretenders, dreamers, and liars. What makes you different? A faint flicker of a smile curved on Aegon's lips. Without a word, he drew the sword at his side. Its blade reflected the sunlight in a shimmer of blue and silver, the distinctive hue of Valyrian steel. But the hilt bore a device that was unfamiliar in detail, yet oddly reminiscent of the Targaryen sigil. The onlookers stepped back as the man raised the sword. In that moment, a hush fell that seemed to envelop the entire courtyard. The blade caught the sun, and a faint ripple of heat emanated from it, as though it breathed. Daemon's eyes narrowed in recognition of steel well forged, perhaps even older or as old as the famed blades of House Targaryen. Aegon returned the sword to its scabbard. I know not if you can truly believe me yet, he said, turning to Rhaenyra. But your eyes do not lie about the condition of this city, this realm. You do not have to trust me. Only grant me the chance to see with mine own eyes how far this war has gone, and if my presence is enough to bring both sides to a table, then let it be so. For if this conflict continues, there will be no realm left to rule. Rhaenyra said nothing for several heartbeats. She was too shrewd to yield so quickly, too proud to bow to an enigma. But something in his words resonated. The city was on the brink. The entire realm was on the verge of collapse. And if there were any chance, however impossible, that the legendary Conqueror had returned to mend the wounds of his house, could she afford not to hear him out? Daemon's hand hovered near the hilt of Dark Sister. The tension in his posture warned that he did not trust this newcomer. Yet even he recognized the strangeness in the air, the intangible aura that came off Aegon like waves of historical power. Aegon broke the silence. Will you deny me entry? Will you cast me out into the street and call me a fraud? Rhaenyra's brow furrowed. She glanced at Daemon, her own loyal knights, and the cluster of onlookers behind them. The war had given her enough caution to fill an ocean, but also enough desperation to consider anything that might end the bloodshed without losing her claim. At length, she gestured. Follow me, but know that I will have a watch on you. Any sign of treachery, and I'll not hesitate to do what must be done. Aegon nodded, a faint shadow of a smile on his lips. I would expect no less. He followed her inside the Red Keep. The castle's torchlit corridors felt claustrophobic after the open air, the hush broken only by the echo of footfalls. Sconces flickered, casting dancing shadows along the walls. He saw the battered visage of the keep, scorch marks on stone, shattered windows hastily repaired, signs of a war that had even breached these mighty halls. Servants peered from behind doorways, some crossing themselves upon seeing the man in black armor. Eventually, Rhaenyra led him to a modest audience chamber, one more suited for private parley than grand court gatherings. Daemon and a few of her trusted lords ringed the room, hands near their swords. Aegon stood calmly, removing his helm and tucking it beneath his arm, letting them see his face in the bright glow of the braziers. You say you have come to end this war, Rhaenyra said once they were settled, yet you do not yet know the details of how it began, or the wrongs that have been done. I know only that your house is divided, Aegon replied. I know that dragons, once a symbol of our power, have been turned against one another. I know that thousands of innocents are caught in the crossfire. Bin? Her lips tightened. So they are. You would lay the blame at my feet, or at the feet of my half-brother. He and his allies struck first. They crowned him in secret after my father's death, hid the news from me. And I would not let that stand. Aegon inclined his head, absorbing her words. I understand. No Targaryen should be robbed of what is rightfully theirs. But in the time I come from, if indeed you accept I am who I say I am, my sisters and I united the realm. We used fire and blood, yes, but we did not turn on one another. We stood together. Now I see my house in tatters, with two factions calling themselves rightful heirs. Where does it end? Daemon stepped forward. It ends when the false king is cast down, and Rhaenyra sits the Iron Throne. A faint flicker of a smile touched Aegon's mouth. And what if your half-brother says the same, that it ends when he destroys you? The tension rose in the room again, knights bristling with offense. Rhaenyra's voice was stern. He took what was mine. He killed those loyal to me. My children, my husband. Blood has been spilled. The realm cannot abide such treachery. Conqueror. Aegon exhaled slowly, placing a hand over the pommel of his sword as though for comfort. War breeds war. If I am truly the founder of this dynasty, then I must see the other side as well, if I am to stand in judgment. Allow me to speak with the Greens. Let them see I do not come to serve you blindly. Let them understand that the realm's survival demands an end to this feud. One of Rhaenyra's lords barked a laugh. You think they'll speak to you? They'll call you a madman and try to take your head. Nebentordim. Aegon met the man's gaze calmly. They may try. But I have a dragon outside, and something tells me he will not permit that so easily. Rhaenyra studied him. In her time, she had known cunning men, liars, even some who dabbled in sorcery. Yet this was different. She could feel a certain presence in him, reminiscent of the Targaryen forebears she had read about in the old texts. Unyielding, solitary, touched by a single-minded resolve. Whether he truly was Aegon the Conqueror or not, the fear in the eyes of those who had seen him was real. A presence such as his could well sway the war's tide. You are determined, she said at last. If you wish to face my half-brother, that is your choice. But do not think he will welcome you, and I will not give you a safe conduct in his territories. I doubt he would honor it regardless. Aegon nodded. I ask for none. Yet if I can bring him to the table, will you come? Her eyes flicked over to Daemon, who returned her gaze with doubt. She drew in a breath, her tone wavering between weariness and defiance. If he agrees to a parley under truce, I will come. But no fewer than 100 knights will flank me. Denanom? Aegon's lips quirked in a fleeting hint of wryness. Very well. Let us see if the king you would depose values his seat so dearly that he would risk the realm itself. In the silence that followed, Rhaenyra's gaze drifted to the window, to the patch of sky brightened by noon sunlight. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, weighed down by grief and rage. War had stolen too much. Perhaps in another life, she might have found wonder in the notion that her legendary ancestor had returned. But now all she could do was cling to the possibility that his arrival might shift the unrelenting tides of violence. Aegon bowed his head in a gesture that was almost courtly. Then he looked at Daemon. You've the air of a warrior, Prince. I would speak with you privately before I go if the Queen permits. One Targaryen to another. Daemon's brows arched slightly. He glanced at Rhaenyra, who gave a subtle nod. The others in the room retreated at her signal, lords and knights murmuring among themselves as they stepped outside. Rhaenyra lingered by the threshold, half turning to look back at them, uncertain if she should leave them alone. But at Aegon's quiet, respectful gesture, she gave one last glance to Daemon and slipped from the chamber. When they were alone, Daemon's demeanor coiled like a spring, ready to lash out. Speak, he said curtly. What do you want from me? Aegon studied the man's face. You are a warrior. A second son, they say. You have ambition, you have boldness, and you love your queen. You would do anything to ensure her victory. Daemon's jaw tightened. That's no secret. Aegon's voice remained low. Then consider if your zeal might lead you to extremes that ravage the very land you wish to rule. I have seen war. I began my conquest upon these shores, yet I see now the unimaginable cost if dragons turn upon dragons in earnest. Daemon sneered faintly. This war began long before you arrived. We fight because we must. And will you fight until the realm is naught but ash? Aegon asked, unflinching. I seek your counsel, because I sense a certain edge in you, a thirst for power that might blind a man. Rhaenyra stands on a precipice. If the war continues, she may claim a hollow throne over a broken realm. Rust. Daemon's eyes flashed with anger. You dare question my loyalty? I question your heart, Aegon said, unwavering. I do not doubt your devotion to her, nor your skill in war. But if you love her, if you love your house, do not let pride drive you to acts that will destroy it. Daemon stepped forward, tension crackling in the air. For a moment, it seemed he might draw Dark Sister. Then the muscle in his jaw worked, and he hissed a breath. He exhaled slowly, as though caging a wild beast within himself. Pride is the blood of the dragon, he said. We bend to no man. Aegon gave a faint nod. I would not have it otherwise. But heed me, steel yourself. The war you wage is about more than just crowning a queen or a king. It's about the legacy of our bloodline, the future of this kingdom. If you butcher each other, there will be nothing left to rule. Daemon held his gaze for several heartbeats. Then, without another word, he brushed past Aegon and exited the chamber. The Conqueror's ghost, or whatever he might be, stood alone for a moment, lost in thought, his eyes troubled. Soon, he too made his way out of the audience chamber. The Red Keep's corridors twisted around him like a labyrinth of memories, and he saw flickers of the past, half-formed phantoms of what had once been. Soldiers in older livery, sisters who had marched at his side, the shape of a castle not yet fully built. He closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself, then continued onward. Outside, the courtyard was crowded with watchers, eager to glimpse this man who might be a living legend. He ignored their stares as he strode across the cobblestones. His dragon still waited in the makeshift clearing near the city's edge, curled among the ruins. The beast stirred at his approach, lifting its massive head. Aegon placed a hand upon its neck, and the dragon exhaled, warm breath ruffling his silvered hair. He paused to glance back at the Red Keep. The seeds of suspicion and wonder had been planted behind those walls. He knew that he would need to venture out to face the Greens if there was to be any hope of uniting these fractured claims. But beyond even that, a question gnawed at him. Why had he been summoned here truly? What power had drawn him across the veil of death and time? The city's people watched him climb into the dragon's saddle. Many of them knelt on instinct, while others simply stared, transfixed. For a moment, the only sound was the loud thump-thump-thump of the dragon's heartbeat, echoing in Aegon's own ears. Then, with a fierce snap of its wings, the creature rose, scattering dust and debris across the plaza. Higher and higher they ascended, the wind whipping at Aegon's face. The rooftops of King's Landing shrank below, and he could see the battered city in its entirety. The clusters of houses, the sprawl of refugees at the gates, the black scars of burned neighborhoods. Far in the distance, the snaking path of the Blackwater glittered in the sunlight. Somewhere beyond lay the forces of the Greens, men whose loyalty lay with a king who shared the name Aegon, Aegon II. The irony weighed on him. Another Aegon in the line of Targaryen kings. Another war for the throne. History repeating itself, a spiral that threatened to consume all. He urged his dragon northward, letting the swirling winds carry him in the direction of that unseen enemy. If the realm was to be saved, he must find the courage to stand before all sides, a phantom from the past, and force them to confront the devastation they had wrought. Yet deep in his heart, Aegon felt an unease. The realm would not be healed easily. Old hatreds and fresh wounds would not be smoothed away by the mere specter of his return. Blood had been spilled, betrayals had taken root, and dragons had been unleashed upon each other. Even the Conqueror's presence might not be enough to quell the fires of vengeance. Still, as he gazed upon the war-torn land below, he vowed to try. For that was what a king did. He strove to protect his kingdom, even if it meant fighting his own blood, even if it meant standing alone against pride, fury, and centuries of expectation. In the roar of the rushing air, in the thunder of his dragon's wings, Aegon the Conqueror returned to a realm that had nearly forgotten him, pressed onward. He could already taste the bitterness of what lay ahead, partly tinged with suspicion. The threat of betrayal, the possibility of mortal danger to himself and his beast. Perhaps he would fail, undone by the rancor that had festered since the old king's death. But he had not come this far, across time, across the realm of the grave, to turn aside meekly. Somewhere below, a child in flea bottom might be looking up, heart swelling with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Somewhere deeper in Westeros, soldiers of the Greens would soon hear a rumor of an impossible visitor in black armor. The skies, once again, would tremble beneath the shadow of a dragon, bearing a king who had once forged the Seven Kingdoms with fire. The city receded behind him, and the horizon opened ahead. The wind tore at his cloak, and the sunlight caught the silver in his hair. He pressed a hand to his sword's hilt, took a long breath, and guided the dragon forward, into the unknown. In the quiet of his mind, he remembered the oath that had driven him in his first life, to unite a fractured land and shape a legacy that would endure. Now, faced with the ruin of his descendants' making, he would try once more to lay the groundwork for peace, even if it was peace forged in the shadow of dragons. Perhaps, just perhaps, Westeros would listen this time. Aegon pressed onward through the skies, guiding his ancient dragon in a broad circle beyond the walls of King's Landing. Below, the city's huddled quarters spread out in cramped chaos. The black water shimmered in the mid-afternoon sun, dotted with battered ships that listed at anchor. Small pockets of farmland just outside the walls appeared scorched and ruined, a grim testament to the raids and skirmishes that had marred the countryside. He felt the wind dig icy fingers through his hair as he urged his mount higher. It had been an age since he had soared like this, if indeed he was who he claimed. He knew only that in his first life, he had once stood on that same hill overlooking the city, deciding how best to bring Westeros under one rule. Now he saw the city in an uglier guise, a capital strangled by doubt and fear. Smoke from half a dozen charred neighborhoods blended with the haze of cooking fires, forming a brownish pall that clung to the skyline. Aegon's heart felt heavy as he guided his dragon west and south, skirting the main roads, passing high above farmland trampled by armies. In a broad orchard now reduced to splintered stumps, armed men in green livery patrolled on horseback. Their banners, once bright, looked stained and torn. Aegon's dragon glided silently overhead, a dark blot against the sun, and the men below jerked their heads up in alarm. He doubted they could truly identify him from such a distance, but the presence of any dragon overhead was enough to rattle them. He pressed his hand lightly to the beast's flank, and the dragon responded by riding the thermals with minimal wing beats. They would not descend yet. He had gleaned enough from Rhaenyra's words to know that the Greens were scattered, some holed up at various strongholds, some roving the crown lands under the banners of lords who had sworn to Aegon II. Others might have retreated farther south, hoping to gather reinforcements. If the realm's divisions were as deep as it seemed, then finding Aegon II in person might prove difficult. Still, he would look, for that was his intent, to stand before the other claimant and see what manner of man this young king truly was. As the dragon soared across a broad swathe of open fields, Aegon caught sight of a winding column of men moving northward along a country road. Wagons laden with spears and crossbows rattled behind a line of cavalry, and from their banners green embroidered with the three-headed dragon, he surmised they were part of the forces loyal to the Boy King. Here might be his first chance at a parley. The notion stirred a flicker of both anticipation and dread. He circled carefully, angling downward at a shallow slope. The men below began to shout and point. He wondered if they had orders to shoot down any dragon that was not recognized, though that seemed foolish without a ballista or a scorpion at the ready. And in any case, no single bolt could easily bring down a Targaryen dragon of this size. His mount emitted a low rumble in its throat, a cautionary growl that seemed to vibrate in the very air. The column of troops began to scatter somewhat, knights forming up, foot soldiers fumbling for their crossbows. Aegon guided his dragon into a measured descent, drawing near enough that the swirling dust enveloped the front ranks of the men on the road. Then, in a swirl of beating wings, the dragon landed on a small ridge overlooking the column, flattening the grass beneath its bulk. For a moment, no one moved. Somewhere in the ranks, a horse whinnied in terror, and a crossbowman loosed a bolt prematurely. It whizzed wide, vanishing into the sky. Aegon said nothing, waiting for the swirl of dust to subside. Then he lifted his visor, letting them see his face. The leader of the column, a knight in partial plate with a surcoat that bore a green three-headed dragon, spurred his mount forward. He held his hand up to keep his men from attacking. Aegon watched calmly. The knight halted, studying the black-armored figure on the dragon's back, as if uncertain whether to call out a challenge or bow. "What is your purpose?" the knight demanded at last, voice carrying over the hush. "In whose name do you come?" Aegon rested one hand on the dragon's flank, letting the other fall to the pommel of his sword in a show of caution rather than aggression. "I am Aegon of House Targaryen," he answered, returned by means I do not fully understand. "I come to speak with your king, Aegon II, if he will grant me an audience." Stunned silence took hold. The men exchanged uneasy glances, crossbows half raised, pikes braced. The knight's mouth opened and closed, struggling for a response. He eyed the black armor, the regal bearing, and the dragon that was clearly no hatchling. A chill wind rustled through the grass. "And if you truly come in peace," the knight managed, "then you may land behind our lines. But know this, we have orders to destroy any threat." A faint smile touched Aegon's lips. "You may try." The dragon gave an ominous snort, and the men shifted nervously. The knight swallowed and beckoned for Aegon to move behind the traveling column, where the land rose into a small plateau. A handful of archers hurried forward, dividing themselves into lines, uncertain whether to aim or stand down. Aegon dismounted with a grace that caught them off guard, as if he had done this very thing hundreds of times before. He laid a soothing hand along the dragon's neck. "Stay," he murmured under his breath, though in a tone that suggested the beast understood far more than a simple beast might. Then, turning to the crowd of wary soldiers, he moved away from the dragon at a measured pace, helm tucked under one arm. The men parted, every eye fixed on him. The knight who had spoken removed his own helm, revealing a head of thinning brown hair, and an expression racked with indecision. "My lord, or whomever you are, I'm Sir Criston Strickland, sworn to King Aegon. We ride for an encampment near the Rosby Road, where we are to join with Lord Hightower's men." "Lord Hightower?" Aegon repeated. The name resonated with him, though he could not quite place it in the tapestry of this century's troubles. He had known a Hightower once, in Old Town, when he came to treat with the High Septon. Yet centuries changed allegiances, men, and the fate of houses. I would speak with him as well. My request remains, bring me to your king. Now. Sir Criston seemed almost relieved to have a directive, even if it came from this enigma. Still, he cast a look at the knights around him, then back to Aegon. "You may ride with us, or fly ahead if you wish. But do not stray far, or the archers might think you're an enemy. The king's forces are spread thin and on alert. There is a great deal of suspicion." "I will ride," Aegon said quietly. "Let my dragon follow overhead." A hush moved through the ranks at the idea of a monstrous dragon shadowing them. Yet the alternative, letting the black beast wander off unsupervised, was even less appealing. So Sir Criston nodded, motioning for one of his men to bring a horse. They found him a tall gray stallion that snorted nervously when Aegon approached. He placed a hand on the animal's neck, murmuring in a strange dialect, and the creature gradually calmed. Thus began a slow, tense procession. The column moved forward, drawn out along the dirt road, flanked on either side by grass that rustled like dead husks in the autumn wind. Aegon rode near the front, silent and self-possessed, while archers followed behind, Crossbows angled, not quite lowered. His dragons soared in languid circles above, occasionally dipping low enough to spook the horses. No one spoke to him at first. The knights and foot soldiers kept darting anxious glances his way, as if expecting him to sprout horns or vanish. Then, a younger knight, perhaps no more than 20, found the courage to ride closer. He had curly blonde hair and a fresh scar across his jaw. "Is it true what you said?" he asked, voice hushed so as not to catch the attention of his commanding officer. "That you are Aegon the Conqueror?" Aegon turned his head. He noted the flicker of hope and confusion in the lad's eyes, recognized a mind torn between wonder and the brutal realities of war. "I am," he said simply. The young knight's lips parted, as though he wished to ask 100 questions at once. But he glanced at his fellow soldiers and fell silent. Aegon sensed the boy's awe and fear. He had once seen similar expressions on the faces of those who had watched him take Westeros with dragonfire and diplomacy. The mixture of reverence and dread was a memory that spanned centuries. They rode on, and the late afternoon sun began its slow descent into the western sky. The wind picked up, carrying a smell of wood smoke from some distant hamlet, perhaps one that had been burned. Twice, they passed through small crossroad villages that had been largely abandoned, shuttered windows and broken fences, telling a silent story of flight. Now and then, Sir Criston received updates from outriders who galloped ahead and then returned, reporting that the road to Rosby was clear. At last, as the sun sank low, they crested a rise and saw in the distance a gathering of tents arrayed in neat rows. Banners snapped in the breeze. Light from torches and campfires glimmered, reflecting off the metal rims of supply wagons. Men were spread out in circles around the fires, some taking what rest they could. Others sharpened swords, hammered out dents in breastplates, or tended to the horses. Aegon's gaze swept the scene, noting the stern discipline of the arrangement. This was no ragged band, but a proper war camp, likely commanded by high lords. Sir Criston urged his horse onward. "You'll find King Aegon's tent at the center near the large green banner. Be mindful, the king, well, he has been unwell." Aegon raised an eyebrow. "Unwell, in body or in spirit?" "Both, perhaps," Sir Criston admitted reluctantly, lowering his voice. "Rumors say he was injured in battle. He seldom shows himself these days, and much of the decision-making has been left to Sir Criston Cole, the Hand, and to Lord Otto Hightower, the king's grandsire. But I do not question my orders. I serve as best I can." "And?" Aegon nodded, pondering. The notion of a wounded, absent king did not bode well for a realm in crisis. He thought of Rhaenyra's resolute stance. Would this other Aegon prove as determined or as cunning as the sister who claimed his throne? Whatever the case, it was clear that the fight was taking its toll on both sides. As they neared the outskirts of the camp, soldiers hastened to form ranks. They'd never seen this black-armored man before, and the sight of a dragon circling overhead put them all on edge. But Sir Criston raised a hand to indicate that the rider was allowed. Murmurs spread from man to man, and Aegon heard snatches of the rumor. "He says he's the Conqueror, come back from the grave, on a black dragon." Disbelief warred with an undercurrent of fascination. At the edge of the camp, a ring of pikemen parted to let them pass. Further in, the tents were arranged around a broad clearing where a large green pavilion stood, flanked by white and gold banners that bore House Hightower's sigil alongside the Targaryen dragon in green. Lanterns hung from tall poles, casting a flickering glow. There were guards posted, men in plate bearing the crest of the Hightowers, men in half-helms with cloaks pinned by badges of the golden sun of House Cole. A few wore simpler harness, but watched with the unwavering concentration of seasoned professionals. Sir Criston dismounted and looked to Aegon. "Will you require a stable for your beast?" Aegon shook his head, glancing at the dragon still gliding overhead. "He will remain free. No stable can hold him, nor would I confine him so." Sir Criston seemed about to protest, but he gave a resigned nod. "As you will. I will send a runner to inform the Hand that you have arrived." Aegon dismounted gracefully. He gave the stallion a gentle pat, then surrendered the reins to a stable boy who approached, gaping. Around them, the entire camp buzzed with speculation. Men craned their necks to get a glimpse of this self-proclaimed Aegon the Conqueror. Some ridiculed him under their breath. Others shifted from foot to foot, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. War had a way of breeding strange miracles and stranger horrors. A lone figure emerged from between two tents. An older man in richly embroidered robes, stooped but with an air of intelligence that radiated from his keen eyes. His hair was mostly white, arranged in a neat fringe around a balding crown, and a short, carefully trimmed beard framed his mouth. Two men-at-arms followed close behind. The older man paused, surveying Aegon. "I am Otto Hightower, Hand of the King," he announced, voice firm despite his age. "I understand you claim to be Aegon the First. Come again." Aegon inclined his head. "You have the right of it, my lord. I come in search of King Aegon. I would speak with him face to face. For the good of the realm." Otto studied him a moment. Suspicion etched into the lines of his brow. "The realm is in chaos. The last thing we need is a charlatan fueling more division." Aegon met his gaze calmly. "I neither come to sow division, nor do I claim what is not mine. I have seen the city and the devastation in these lands. The Targaryen name is tarnished by bloodshed. I seek to rectify that." "I know him." Otto's mouth tightened, but a flicker of something, perhaps curiosity, sparked in his eyes. "The king is in no condition to greet unknown visitors. Though if you would submit yourself to my questioning, I might decide if you're worth his time." "I will meet your questions," Aegon said. "But only if there is a promise that no harm will be done to me or my dragon, provided I make no move of aggression." Otto gave a brief, curt nod. "Agreed. If you truly wish to speak, we shall do so under truce." "That's so." He turned, leading the way toward a smaller tent that stood near the rear of the pavilion. Guards parted at his signal. Within, a brazier glowed, casting dancing shadows on the canvas walls. A small table and two chairs had been set there, evidently for private discussions. Otto gestured for Aegon to sit. Aegon lowered himself into the offered chair. Otto took the seat opposite. One of Otto's guards remained by the entrance, hand on his sword pommel, while another lingered behind the hand's chair, arms folded. Otto folded his hands on the table, taking in the sight of the black armor. The sword hilt at Aegon's side. "You speak as though you are indeed some revenant king. That defies both reason and the faith. Tell me your story, if you have one. Explain, in detail, how it is you came to appear in this time." Aegon inhaled slowly, weighing how best to answer. He himself did not fully comprehend the forces that had brought him here. Yet what little he understood he conveyed in cautious words. He spoke of being roused by dreams. Dreams of his house in peril, of dragons devouring one another, of a land torn asunder by a civil war that threatened the very foundation he had once laid. He did not lie, but neither did he delve too deeply into mysteries he could not define. In the flickering brazier light, Otto's face was a mask of guarded skepticism. Now and then, the older man's gaze drifted to the sword at Aegon's hip, or to the Targaryen crest etched into his cuirass. When Aegon finished, Otto was silent for a time. He rubbed his chin, eyes distant. "A remarkable tale," he said at last, tone measured. "And if you are an impostor, well, it is a finely crafted fable, one that might sway the hearts of the gullible." Aegon's expression did not change. "I need no one to believe me simply by words. My presence alone should tell you that I am more than some traveling jester. You have seen my dragon. Have you known of any other such black and silver beast in the realm?" Otto pursed his lips. "Indeed, I have not. Yet dragons sometimes hatch unpredictably from old clutches. There are still eggs unaccounted for, or so rumors say. A man could claim many things if he were cunning enough to seize control of a grown dragon." "Now, Han?" Aegon allowed himself a faint smile. "Believe what you will. Your doubt is not unexpected. But I have not come to quibble over my identity. I have come to see if your king will parley with his sister." If there can be an end to this war before Westeros is ravaged beyond repair. Otto arched an eyebrow. You come to speak of peace, but from whose vantage? The woman you name his sister, the one wearing the crown in King's Landing, has unleashed dragons upon our cause. She calls herself queen, and she has no shortage of supporters in the city. I do not see that she is eager for terms. Wait. Aegon's voice hardened slightly. She told me she would meet if her brother would do the same. She claims that it was he who usurped her rightful inheritance. I mean to hear both sides, to see if reason might yet prevail. Otto let out a slow breath. Reason is in short supply these days. The king has been grievously wounded. He trusts few beyond those in his immediate circle. Lord Hightower, Sir Criston Cole. Even I have found him changed, wary of counsel. Still, if you truly want an audience, I can arrange it. But do not expect a warm welcome. Memorba. Warmth I do not require, Aegon said. Only an honest exchange. Otto considered this, eyes flickering with calculation. Very well. Remain in the camp tonight, under guard, and in the morning you shall see the king. I will speak to him, if he is strong enough, and we will see what his will decrees. Should you prove false, rest assured that we have ways of subduing dragons, or at least their riders. Aegon inclined his head in acceptance. He sensed that Otto Hightower was a man adept at the game of power, seeking advantage even in these dire times. That was no surprise. Every war needed its schemers, just as every throne needed its guardians. He only hoped that the old man's cunning might be turned towards saving the realm rather than dooming it. With the conversation ended, Otto gestured to his guards. Show him to a tent, treat him as a guest, but keep watch, and see that no harm comes to him, nor from him. The guards saluted. Aegon rose, gave a respectful half-bow to Otto, and followed the men out into the cooling night air. Dusk had settled over the camp, and torches now lined the rows of tents. The low murmur of voices drifted like an undercurrent beneath the crackling flames. He heard the whinny of horses, the clank of pots, the occasional barked order. Above, his dragon still circled, a black silhouette against a deepening purple sky. The guards led him past rows of canvas, where men huddled over campfires, exchanging rumors of the day's march. A few turned and stared openly. One recognized him from the road and lifted a hand in a tentative greeting, but most just gawked, uncertain how to react. Aegon's footsteps were steady, his bearing calm, though he felt the weight of many eyes upon him. They stopped at a modest tent near the perimeter of the camp. A lone brazier stood outside the flap, giving off a weak glow. You may rest here, said one of the guards, a man with a graying beard. We'll post watchmen around. If you need anything, speak up. Aegon nodded. I thank you. He stepped inside, finding a simple cot, a stool, and a chest that presumably contained spare blankets. The canvas walls rustled in the breeze. Dim lantern light cast uncertain shadows. He removed his helm and set it aside, then sank onto the stool, letting out a slow, weary exhalation. In the hush, he listened to the noises of the camp. The hum of distant conversation, the clatter of arms, the occasional sharp neigh of a horse. He felt odd being treated as both guest and prisoner, but it was hardly unexpected. All throughout his first conquest he had encountered distrust whenever he approached a new lord's seat. Time changed little in that regard. He reached up to unbuckle parts of his armor, letting the cuirass slide free. Beneath he wore a quilted doublet that bore the faint pattern of the Targaryen sigil. His body felt stiff, as though it had traveled endless leagues in a single day. Perhaps he had, in a sense, traveling not just across the Crownlands, but across centuries of memory, where once he had known precisely how to shape alliances, how to coax or coerce lords to kneel. He now found himself in a realm already half-formed, half-broken, bound by 1,000 feuds. The Dance of the Dragons was no simple conquest. It was a fratricidal struggle, tangled by the complexities of each Targaryen's ambition. He wondered if some pieces were already too shattered to mend. He recalled Rhaenyra's haunted eyes, the bitterness that underlined her every word. He thought of the rumor that Aegon II was wounded, either physically or in spirit, retreating from the field. These were no ephemeral squabbles, easily resolved by a show of draconic force. Both sides had poured blood into the ground, and that sort of hatred seldom vanished overnight. Setting his sword beside the cot, he let his hand drift over the hilt. He could almost feel the blade hum under his palm, resonant with the old forging arts of Valyria. Sometimes, in moments of stillness, it felt as though the steel had a will of its own, drawing him toward grand designs. But a sword was only a tool, ultimately. Whether it brought conquest or ruin depended on the one who wielded it. In the gloom he found himself whispering a short prayer to the gods. Whether old or new, he did not care. He prayed for guidance, for the wisdom to see a path through this labyrinth of feuds. Then he closed his eyes, allowing fatigue to settle in his bones, and listened to the evening's hush. He did not sleep long or well, for he was unaccustomed to the camp's swirl of nighttime activity. Throughout the dark hours, men came and went, and once he heard the horns of a distant alarm. In the morning he rose stiffly from the cot, splashed water on his face from a small basin, and adjusted his armor. The guard outside promptly informed him that the hand had ordered fresh bread and ale for him, and a chance to speak with the king at midday if the king's health permitted. Aegon ate without hurry, nodding his thanks to the soldier who delivered his simple meal. The bread was coarse, the ale watered down, but he consumed both with a stoic acceptance. By the time the sun had risen over the eastern horizon, the camp was abuzz with renewed vigor. Men preparing to move out, captains bellowing orders. Far overhead, his dragon's soared, never straying too far from the place where its rider had settled. He spent part of the morning quietly observing the men around him, gleaning small fragments of their morale, their discipline, and their devotion to King Aegon II. Some had the look of seasoned knights, while others appeared to be newly conscripted or pressed into service by local lords. In hushed conversations, he overheard talk of the hardships in the field, shortages of supplies, uneasy alliances with certain lords who demanded more coin. He also sensed a pervasive fear of what might happen if Rhaenyra's forces swept out from King's Landing in full. Around mid-morning, Otto Hightower returned. Flanked by 4 guards and a man in plain mail who looked as though he served as a steward or scribe. Otto did not trouble with pleasantries. "The king will see you," he stated. "Come." Aegon rose, clasping his sword belt firmly in place. He followed Otto through the milling ranks of the camp, past men striking tents and loading them onto wagons. The day was shaping up to be bright, though a cool wind still blew, rustling the banners overhead. The black dragon circled at a respectful distance, as if waiting for a summons. They approached the largest pavilion at the camp's center. Several knights in polished half-plate guarded the entrance. The tent was richly dyed in green and silver, bearing the triple-headed dragon of House Targaryen in green upon its flaps. Inside, the air was stuffy and smelled faintly of poultices, as though someone had been receiving medical care. Otto lifted a hand to stay the guards. Then he gestured Aegon forward. "Mind your tongue. The king is easily tackled." Aegon ducked through the entry, stepping into a space partitioned by heavy curtains. Behind those curtains lay a wide area furnished with a simple, low-lying bed. A young man reclined there, propped by pillows, one leg stretched out stiffly beneath the covers. His hair was silver blonde, but far from lustrous, damp with sweat, plastered to his brow. His face was wan, and dark circles ringed his eyes. On a nearby table lay a scattering of medicines, salves, bandages, vials of some pungent liquid. A few attendants hovered, one stirring a pot of herbal concoction, another holding a cloth ready to dab at the king's forehead if needed. At the foot of the bed stood a knight in heavy armor with a stern, tired face, and the bearing of a man used to command. His sigil, displayed on a clasp at his shoulder, marked him as Sir Criston Cole. The king's hand after Otto had relinquished the chain. Aegon II turned his head with evident effort. His eyes narrowed as he took in the stranger in black armor. The slender fingers of his right hand fumbled at the sheets, as if searching for a weapon. Sir Criston Cole placed a gentle hand over the king's arm, murmuring quietly, "All is well, your grace. This is the man I spoke of, the one claiming an audience. He traveled under our banners." Otto cleared his throat. "Your grace, this is the one who calls himself Aegon Targaryen, Aegon the Conqueror." The young king's lips twitched in a joyless smile. He tried to push himself more upright but grimaced in pain. "The Conqueror, eh?" he rasped. "Then perhaps he can tell me how to conquer this wretched fever. It gnaws at my bones." Aegon approached, keeping his arms at his sides in a show of no threat. "Your Grace, I have heard much of your claim as well as that of your sister. I come to see if some accord might be reached." Aegon II pressed his head back into the pillows, letting out a bitter laugh. "Accord? Rhaenyra took my throne, my city. She kills my friends and supporters. She has sworn that she will see me dethroned. Or worse. What accord is there to be had?" "Moo. She speaks a different tale," Aegon replied calmly, "saying that you usurped her right, that you and your allies crowned you in secret." "Secret?" The king coughed, a racking sound that made his attendants stir. "My father died naming me in his final breath." "So you say," Aegon answered, "and so she denies. Meanwhile, the realm bleeds. Men die for a cause they only half understand. The small folk cower under the wings of dragons." For a moment, the young king's eyes flared with anger, but then he winced as pain gripped him. Sir Criston Cole moved to steady him, while Otto hovered with concern. The king waved them away, forcing out words through gritted teeth. "You come to me wearing black, spouting talk of peace. Do you belong to my sister's faction, or do you truly stand apart?" "I stand for the realm," Aegon said. "If you were to accept terms, to meet your sister in a parley, some common ground might be found." Aegon II stared at him, a mix of incredulity and scorn in his feverish gaze. "She would poison my cup the moment we sat, or have her men butcher me. You ask me to trust the woman who would see me destroyed. Then true. I ask you to weigh the cost of continuing," Aegon said quietly. "If this war goes on, will either side truly be left standing? Where will the people turn once they have lost faith in the name Targaryen?" Otto cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Your Grace, we are in a precarious position. We have men loyal to you, yes, but supplies run thin. The city is out of our hands. There may be wisdom in hearing what the Queen, your sister, has to say. At the very least, a truce might buy us time to regroup." "Namfiam." Sir Criston Cole's eyes flicked from Otto to Aegon, measuring each carefully. He had the look of a soldier who disliked the idea of negotiation, but recognized the reality of their circumstances. "If we do so, we must ensure the king's safety. A parley in neutral territory, perhaps." Aegon III's breath came shallow and quick, sweat beading on his pale forehead. His gaze lingered on the tall, armored figure who claimed to be the Conqueror reborn. "You truly believe you can broker this?" "I cannot guarantee the outcome," Aegon admitted. "But I have spoken to your sister. She will consider a parley, provided you do as well." The young king let out a shaky exhalation. His wounded leg twitched under the covers. "What is left for me if I concede to her? She will demand I kneel and brand me a usurper. I would be a puppet, if she spares me at all." Aegon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That is a question only you and your sister can answer. But if you will not even speak, then this war may end only in more tragedy. I have seen villages razed, fields burned, children orphaned. Is that the legacy you desire?" "Dim?" For a long while, Aegon said nothing. His eyes flickered shut as though the weight of his wounds and the demands of the moment were too great to bear. The attendants shifted uncomfortably, and Otto gestured for them to bring water or a damp cloth. After several strained heartbeats, the king reopened his eyes, focusing once more on the black-armored man before him. "If you can promise me safe conduct," he whispered, "and if my advisors deem it feasible, then I will meet her. But not in King's Landing. She must come to a place I name. I will not walk into her lair like a lamb for slaughter." "Nan." Otto's mouth hardened into a thin line. "Your Grace, traveling might be too taxing in your condition. And if this is a ruse, I will see to it that it is no ruse," Aegon answered firmly, turning to the hand. "I will not allow either side to spring a trap, not if I am present. Our dragons can stand sentinel. I ask only that you come to the table." A faint tremor coursed through Aegon III's frame, either from fever or from the swirl of doubts haunting him. Then, with visible effort, he He nodded. Very well. Consult with my hand. Find a place and time. Let the princess come if she dares. Mentee. Sir Kristen Cole studied the man who called himself Aegon the Conqueror, seeming torn between suspicion and a faint glimmer of hope. If we do arrange such a meeting, how do we know your sister won't use it to slaughter us all? She gave me her word, Aegon said. Cole let out a mirthless chuckle. Her word. Aegon did not flinch. And I will demand further guarantees from her. The location will be neutral, one your side selects. If she refuses, then all know that it is her intransigence, not yours, that prevents peace. Msao. Otto's eyes glinted with calculation, as if seeing the advantage in that arrangement. Yes, if she refuses, we can at least hold the moral high ground. Such as it remains. Aegon II coughed again, wheezing. One of the attendants pressed a cup of herbal brew to his lips, and he swallowed with a grimace. He waved a hand to indicate that the meeting was done. Work out the details. If this phantom conqueror can make Rhaenyra come to terms, so be it. Nani. Aegon dipped his head respectfully, though inside he felt only a cautious relief. Step one had been taken. Yet bringing these two wounded, furious sides to a parley was merely the beginning, and he sensed that even a single spark of mistrust could ignite the entire powder keg once more. Otto gestured, and Aegon withdrew from the tent, leaving the fever-ravaged king to his rest. Outside, the dawn sunlight had grown bright and harsh, illuminating the neat lines of half-disassembled tents. Soldiers bustled about, loading gear into wagons. The entire camp seemed poised for movement, as though they intended to march or reposition soon. Aegon turned to Otto, who now walked beside him. Where will you propose this meeting take place? Otto stroked his beard thoughtfully. Somewhere, neither side holds a strategic advantage. Far from King's Landing, yet not so distant that we'd spend weeks on the road. There's a minor castle east of Rosby, Crow's Nest, some call it, though not the seat of House Morrigan. It's small, largely ruined from what I recall. But it sits on neutral land. No major house claims it now. We could exchange hostages to ensure no treachery occurs. No. Aegon nodded. I will speak to Rhaenyra, though I must warn you, she is wary as well. She will likely want assurances of her own. Otto sighed. Of course. War is a state of mutual suspicion. But if you can secure her agreement, we shall be ready. I will gather forces sufficient to protect the king from any betrayal, though not so many as to appear we come in aggression. They stopped near the edges of the camp, where men were hitching horses to supply carts. Aegon gazed upward, seeing the black silhouette of his dragon against the pale blue. He glanced at Otto. I will go then, and bring your terms to her. Pray that both sides still desire peace. And if they do not? Otto asked, voice edged with cynicism. Aegon's face hardened. Then the bloodshed continues, and I will have to find another way. If any remains. Otto gave a curt nod, clasped his hands behind his back, and walked away, calling for a scribe to draft the exact terms. Aegon watched him go, thoughts churning with the enormity of his task. In moments he retrieved his horse from the stables, sensing the curious eyes of soldiers who paused in their tasks. He mounted swiftly, then raised his face to the sky. A piercing whistle cut through the camp's din, and overhead, the dragon let out a thunderous roar. Men cried out in alarm as the beast descended, stirring the tents with blasts of air from its wings. Aegon guided his horse to a clearing, where his dragon alit upon the crushed grass. The black scales shimmered in the late morning sun. With practiced ease, Aegon dismounted the horse and ascended the dragon's side, securing himself in the saddle. He cast one more look over the camp, a swirl of green banners. Men in armor, the stern face of Otto Hightower watching from a short distance. Then, with a nudge of his heels, the dragon propelled itself skyward. The world dropped away beneath them in a rush of air and dust. Higher and higher, they climbed. Aegon glanced eastward, where King's Landing lay beyond rolling hills and woodland glens. The city would be bristling with Rhaenyra's forces, heavily guarded now that the rumors of a black dragon and a returning conqueror had circulated. He would have to approach carefully, bearing no ill intent, and yet pressing for a parley that might change everything. He wondered if Rhaenyra would suspect betrayal. Perhaps she would think him swayed by the Greens. Or perhaps Daemon would greet him with cold steel, seeing him as an obstacle to the Queen's rightful vengeance. In truth, any or all of these outcomes could await him. Yet he had no choice but to continue along this delicate path. The flight back to King's Landing took the better part of the morning, for though the dragon was capable of swift travel, Aegon chose not to drive it at a reckless pace. He wanted time to reflect on what he would say when he arrived, how he might best convey the king's willingness to meet. The wind rushed past him, carrying the hint of salt from the sea. Fields and villages sprawled below, some dotted with refugees, others blackened and deserted. He could not help feeling a twinge of guilt, though it was not truly his war that had caused such devastation. Still, the blood of the dragon, his own descendants, had wrought this chaos in their struggle for the Iron Throne. Was it not partly his responsibility to set it right, if such a thing was possible? As King's Landing came into view, he observed the walls from a distance. He noted an increase in watchmen on the battlements, archers stationed in clusters. The crenellations bristled with spears and the glint of polished metal. Word of the Black Dragon's departure must have reached them, for they did not loose arrows as he approached. Still, the city's defenses were formidable, and tension hung in the air like a drawn bowstring. He guided his dragon to circle above the Red Keep. Almost at once horns blared from the castle walls, and he saw soldiers rushing. Yet none launched an attack. Whether by Rhaenyra's command or simple uncertainty, they held their fire. Aegon sought out a broad courtyard, the same place he had landed the previous day. With a roar, the dragon descended, stirring wind that bent the spindly trees lining the stone yard. Men scattered, some pressing themselves against the walls, others raising shields. A group of knights in black and red livery rushed forward, forming a line. Aegon dismounted and raised both hands to show he was unarmed. "I come in peace," he called over the wind. One of the knights stepped forward, Sir Eric Cargill, if Aegon recalled Rhaenyra's naming from their brief mention. The knight's face was grim, but not hostile. "The Queen awaits you. Follow me." Aegon inclined his head. He murmured a quiet command to his dragon, gesturing for it to remain in the courtyard. Then he walked with Sir Eric through the castle gates, the echo of their footsteps amplified by the high walls. The tension among the keep's guards was palpable, as though any moment might bring a clash of steel. They made their way into the heart of the Red Keep, ascending a winding staircase to a hall that overlooked the city. Rhaenyra stood by a tall, narrow window, her black gown trailing across the floor. Daemon was at her side, arms folded over his chest. A small council of lords and advisors hovered behind them. Men wearing the crescent moon of House Valerion, the golden hawk of House Celtigar, and others whose sigils spoke of fealty to the Queen. Their expressions ranged from mistrust to cautious hope. Rhaenyra turned as Aegon entered. Her gaze flicked to his armor, then to his face, searching for signs of duplicity. "You have returned," she said. "I trust you spoke with my half-brother or his men." Aegon stepped forward, ignoring the suspicious glances of the assembled lords. "I have. King Aegon II has agreed to a parley on one condition: that it be held on neutral ground, a place of his choosing, to ensure he does not walk into a trap." Dump. A faint laugh escaped Daemon. "A trap, he says, when it was they who seized your throne in the first place." Rhaenyra silenced him with a gesture. Her eyes held Aegon's with intensity. Where would this parley take place? A ruined keep near Rosby, eastward, known as Crow's Nest. None of his allies hold it. It sits in desolation. Lord Hightower and Sir Criston Cole propose that each side bring a limited retinue, with an exchange of hostages to ensure good faith. Mendersrau. At that, the lords behind her muttered, some outraged that they should give up any advantage. Rhaenyra's expression remained grave, and she lifted a hand for silence. "He will come in person." Aegon nodded. "He is wounded, but he intends to be present. I saw him with my own eyes. He can barely stand, yet he refuses to cede to you without at least a final negotiation." Daemon's lip curled. "Negotiation? Or an attempt to trick you?" or to lure us into a precarious place where his men can spring an ambush. Never again. I have demanded terms that forbid any such act, Aegon said. We will have watchers in the skies as well. My dragon, your dragons, there can be no approach unseen, and if either side commits treachery, the other will know. The realm will know. Some of Rhaenyra's lords grumbled, but she took a measured breath, studying Aegon's face. You truly believe this can work? I believe it may be the only chance. Your half-brother is unwell. He could fight on, but not without costs to both sides. If you meet, perhaps you can find a settlement, or at least a respite to spare the small folk. If you refuse, he will use that as proof that you never intended peace at all. Dale. Her eyes darkened, flicking to Daemon for the briefest moment, as if seeking his counsel. Daemon seemed torn between anger and the faintest flicker of caution. Finally, Rhaenyra drew herself upright. Very well. We will go to this parley. We will agree to a hostage exchange if that is what it takes. But let it be known that if my half-brother attempts any trick, I will repay him in blood. Aegon dipped his head. Then I shall relay your acceptance to Lord Hightower and the king. We must move swiftly if we are to quell further bloodshed. She pursed her lips. I will gather a party of knights and lords I trust. No more than 40 men, if that. Will the Greens do the same? They will. I will insist upon it, Aegon said. Each side will bring watchers in the sky, but no large host. Let it be a meeting of chosen representatives. Rhaenyra nodded, though worry lines creased her brow. The knowledge that so many lives hinged on this precarious gathering weighed on her. She turned to her advisors, instructing them to make preparations. Daemon stood rigid, still bristling with distrust, but he bowed his head to the Queen's decision. Aegon lingered, waiting until the swirl of voices subsided. Then Rhaenyra stepped closer to him, her tone pitched low so that only he might hear. If you have deceived me, if this is some cunning ploy, I will burn you first before turning my wrath on them. He held her gaze without flinching. I do not deceive you, Your Grace. I came to stop the slaughter of Targaryens by Targaryens. If I fail, then let the gods judge me, but I will not betray you. The end. She studied him a moment longer, then turned on her heel. Very well. Let us see if your claims are true, then. Aegon the Conqueror. With that final utterance, she swept from the hall, lords and knights trailing her. Daemon spared Aegon a baleful glare before following after his queen. Aegon stood in the hush that remained, the echo of her words lingering in the vaulted space. He let out a slow breath, feeling the knot of tension coil tighter in his chest. 2 Targaryens, each certain of their right, each with blood on their hands, were about to meet in a ruined fortress under fragile guarantees. Peace might be won, or the last hope for it might die there. He walked to the tall window where Rhaenyra had stood, gazing over the city. Far below, the labyrinth of streets and alleyways wound toward the shimmering Blackwater. He recalled the dawn of his original conquest, how he had gazed upon these same lands, seeing not destruction, but possibility. Time had warped that dream into a nightmare of warring kin. Pressing his palm to the cool stone, he wondered what he might say or do at the parley itself, how he might hold these furious scions of House Targaryen in check. Perhaps it would be impossible. Yet he had not been summoned here, by gods or fate or some strange rift in time, to abandon the cause easily. So he would do what he had always done: stand firm, speak plainly, let his presence invoke the memory of unity that had once bound the 7 kingdoms under a single banner. If that memory still carried any weight in the hearts of his descendants, then it might stay their hands from each other's throats. He turned from the window, footsteps echoing on the polished floor, and made his way back down the corridors of the Red Keep. Servants pressed themselves against the walls, some bowing, others staring at him with open fascination. He passed a small courtyard where a young squire was feeding an injured messenger hawk, and the sight of that battered bird made him think of how precarious all their hopes were. Perched on broken wings, reaching the courtyard where his dragon waited, Aegon once more mounted its massive flank. The watchful men-at-arms maintained their distance, crossbows ready if he turned hostile, but he gave them no cause. Instead, with a final glance at the towers of the Red Keep, he urged the beast aloft. In the swirl of that powerful ascent, his black cloak whipped around him, snapping in the gust. The dragon bellowed, echoing across the city's rooftops. For a moment, the entire capital seemed to pause, as if listening to that ancient roar. Then the creature angled its wings and sped south, the wind a bracing lash against Aegon's face. He would return to Otto Hightower, confirm the chosen site of the parley, and see what next steps might be taken. The Greens would march to Crow's Nest. The Blacks would ride out from King's Landing. And Aegon, the Conqueror in name or truth, would stand in the middle, striving to avert a final cataclysmic clash. He had no illusions about how difficult this would be. Hatred and grief had burrowed deep into both sides. One false move could unleash a fury that would sweep Westeros in dragonfire. But as he soared above the city, the wind roaring in his ears, he called upon the memory of his first conquest, a memory that reminded him that the impossible could sometimes be achieved if one refused to yield. Below, the streets receded into a tapestry of muddy roads and burnt ruins. People craned their necks at the dark shape overhead, uncertain whether to cheer or cower. A single question drifted on the wind. Had salvation or doom arrived in the form of this ancient presence? Aegon tightened his grip on the reins, guiding his dragon over the eastern roads, banks of autumn-tinged forest, and distant farmland. At the horizon, crows circled a field where some battle or skirmish had taken place. The land was scarred, but it was not yet past saving. He whispered a vow into the wind, letting the dragon's heartbeat set the rhythm. He would do all in his power to end this war of dragons, to spare what little remained of the realm he had once sought to unite. Whether that vow would be fulfilled or shattered, only the coming days would tell. But for now, he pressed on, the black wings carrying him toward the next uncertain step in a dance that might either restore Westeros or plunge it further into darkness. K.G. Aegon circled back to the green encampment just as twilight began to shroud the land, painting the sky with deep purples and streaks of dying gold. The wind whipped around him in fitful gusts, carrying the faint smell of distant cookfires and the sharper tang of horse sweat and steel. Soldiers on the perimeter shouted alerts when they saw the dark shape of his dragon approach, but no arrows flew. They recognized this rider by now, though familiarity did little to soothe their unease. He brought the dragon down upon a patch of flattened grass, not far from the main tents. Guards converged warily, hands on hilts, uncertain how quickly to move forward. Even so, no one challenged him outright. It was enough to show that Otto Hightower's orders still held. Aegon dismounted, armor clicking softly in the settling hush, and nodded to a lean-faced man wearing a captain's cloak. "I'll speak with the hand," he said simply, his voice subdued. The soldier swallowed and inclined his head. "This way, my lord." He led Aegon through the rows of campfires and half-struck tents. Men paused from their tasks to watch him pass, some with suspicion, others with cautious curiosity. Aegon's black armor seemed to blend with the twilight, a silent specter moving among them. Twice, he felt their gazes linger on the sword at his side, as though expecting it to be drawn at any moment. They reached Otto's tent, where the hand stood conversing with several knightly officers. Upon noticing Aegon's arrival, Otto lifted a hand to dismiss his subordinates. He turned to face this self-proclaimed conqueror with a somber expression. The lines in Otto's face looked deeper in the gathering darkness, and a single lantern cast flickering shadows across the folds of his robes. "Well?" Otto asked in a clipped tone. "Does your mission bear fruit?" Aegon inclined his head in a brief, polite gesture. "Queen Rhaenyra has agreed to meet. She will come to the ruined keep east of Rosby, Crow's Nest, as you named it. No more than 40 men on her side. She expects the same from yours, and an exchange of hostages to guarantee good faith." "Bess." Otto let out a slow breath, relief mingling with tension. Then it settled. "We must prepare quickly. The king's condition is uncertain, but I will see he makes the journey." "Will he be able to travel so soon?" Aegon asked. Otto's mouth drew into a firm line. He must. The alternative is to remain here, ceding all appearance of strength. It would encourage our enemies to press harder. Even a bedridden king can serve as a rallying symbol for his loyalists, provided we show him bravely facing the queen's demands. Aegon studied Otto's face. Very well. And your men, will they truly respect this truce? Otto sniffed. If you can promise that her men will not ambush us, then we shall not violate it. But be warned. If we suspect the slightest foul play, we will not hesitate to defend the king. Any illusions of peaceful discourse will end the moment we sense a trap. Aegon understood. Both sides balanced on a knife's edge. One misstep would send them careening into bloodshed. I will do what I can to keep the peace, he said quietly. We must all be on our guard, but not so much that we sabotage this chance. Otto gave a sharp nod. We march at dawn. The distance is not far. 2 days of careful travel along the Rosby Road. The armies shall halt at the outskirts of the ruins, while a smaller party proceeds to the keep. You and your dragon may watch from above, if that is your custom. Aegon inclined his head. I will remain close enough to intervene should anything go awry. Let us hope it does not come to that. Otto turned away, calling for a steward to draft orders. Aegon lingered a moment, his gaze trailing over the rows of tents, the flickering campfires, the men bending over whetstones or stirring thin stews in battered pots. Many looked weary, their eyes haunted by the constant threat of battle. Some had families miles away, perhaps behind enemy lines, or living in villages too close to the warfront. The realm was littered with heartbreak, and if this parley failed, the heartbreak would only deepen. He left Otto to his preparations and returned to the place where his dragon waited. The creature rumbled softly, uncoiling its sinuous neck as he approached. Aegon placed a hand on its scaled flank, feeling the slow rise and fall of its breath. The beast's eyes reflected the campfires in molten gold. In his own mind, Aegon felt a pang of responsibility. For the realm, for House Targaryen, for the many lives caught in the crossfire of Dragon's fury. Would these negotiations truly prevent further calamity, or merely delay the inevitable? He murmured a few words in a language older than the common tongue. The dragon snorted, releasing a thin plume of smoke from its nostrils, then settled back into a crouch. Aegon stroked the creature's rough scales, letting his thoughts drift to the tasks at hand. He would need rest before the morning came, for the next days could shape the fate of the entire war. At first light, he was awakened by the clamor of an army breaking camp. Horns sounded in measured intervals. Horses whinnied, wagons rattled. The acrid smell of last night's fires mingled with the earthy tang of dew-soaked canvas. Aegon donned his armor swiftly, fastening each buckle and strap with practiced efficiency. He stepped out of his tent to see lines of men in various states of readiness. Some preparing to march, others tending to the king's litter, which would allow Aegon II to travel despite his injuries. He found Otto nearby, overseeing the loading of supplies onto a pair of stout wagons. The hand's voice cut through the din, issuing orders to a squire, then turning to speak with a heavy-set knight in partial plate. When he caught sight of Aegon, Otto beckoned him closer. "We move out within the hour," the hand said. "The king will ride in a special carriage. He has demanded to appear before his soldiers at least once, so they can see he is still alive, still strong enough to lead." "And is he strong enough?" Aegon asked softly. A flicker of doubt crossed Otto's face. "He is determined if nothing else. The maesters have done what they can, poultices for his leg, tonics for the fever, but the rest is willpower. If he falters, Sir Criston Cole and I will do what is necessary to maintain order." Aegon glanced around. "We must ensure that the men know this journey is not a battle march. They should not be expecting to fight the Queen's forces along the way." Otto waved a dismissive hand. "They understand the parley, but caution is wise. We cannot look weak, or Rhaenyra's outriders might attempt something. We will keep formation for protection. Let your presence serve as a reminder that we do not ride out seeking open war yet." Aegon left Otto to his duties, and made his way to where the black dragon was tethered in a wide clearing. The beast looked restless, pawing at the ground and flaring its wings now and again. Nearby stood a group of soldiers whose uneasy job it was to watch for any sign of aggression from the dragon. They kept their distance, carefully. When Aegon approached, they seemed relieved to yield the territory. He murmured to the dragon, slipping a length of harness over its scaled shoulders. Though it was no docile mount, the creature accepted Aegon's guiding hands, as if bound to him by some ancient bond. Once secured, Aegon vaulted into the saddle. He surveyed the camp from his vantage point on the dragon's back, observing lines of men falling in behind wagons, banners lifting in the gentle morning breeze. A short while later, horns blared the signal to move out. The mass of soldiers, perhaps 3,000 in number, tramped away from the old encampment, forming into ranks. At the center of the column, a black carriage with green and silver trim bore the king, accompanied by a mounted guard of knights. Otto rode near the carriage, conferring with Sir Criston Cole. Aegon guided his dragon into the sky, climbing above the slow-moving host, wings beating in a powerful rhythm. From up here, the train of men and horses looked small, winding along the road that cut through meadows and sparse woodland. The first day's march was uneventful, punctuated mostly by the shift of the weather and the occasional stopping point to water the horses. Scouts rode ahead, scanning for any sign of Rhaenyra's outriders, but none appeared. Aegon drifted between flying ahead and circling back, ensuring that no threat approached. Now and again, he landed near the center of the column to rest and exchange a few words with Otto or the knights. They pressed on until late afternoon, then made camp in a broad field that offered some defensible ground. Archers and pikemen set watch around the perimeter. The king's carriage was drawn up near the largest tent, where Otto, Sir Criston, and a handful of lords quickly set to discussing the next day's approach. Aegon did not attend their war council. Instead, he found a quiet spot near the field's edge, with his dragon coiled behind him like a slumbering fortress. He gazed at the vast sky, tinged now with the colors of dusk. A few scattered stars emerged, twinkling faintly. The hush of the encampment settled like a cloak, broken by occasional murmurs or the whistle of a kettle. Slowly he unbuckled his gauntlets, resting them on his knees, and tried to steady his mind. Each moment pressed the two factions closer together, physically and in spirit, but that did not guarantee peace. The thought of what might happen at Crow's Nest weighed on him like a stone. When dawn came on the second day, the green host was once more on the move, trudging along the dusty roads. The morning air was crisp, carrying a promise of colder nights ahead. Aegon soared above them, scanning the horizon. His eyes picked out something unusual, a rising plume of dust far to the east. Perhaps Rhaenyra's vanguard was on the march. He directed his dragon lower, stirring a brief panic among the foot soldiers, who even after 2 days, still hadn't grown accustomed to the thunder of wings overhead. He landed near Otto and relayed what he'd seen. Otto nodded, grim-faced. "Then she has already left King's Landing, likely with her retinue of knights. We'll meet them soon enough." They pressed on, the day wearing away beneath a pale sun that never quite burned through the haze of cloud. Toward late afternoon, the terrain began to rise, forming gentle hills. The road narrowed, passing through a sparse woodland stripped almost bare by autumn winds. At last, they emerged onto a wide expanse of rocky ground, dotted with tufts of yellowed grass. Through the drifting dust, the shape of a ruined fortress could be seen perched atop a low hill. A portion of its walls leaned precariously inward, as if half collapsed. One tower stood intact, while others were crumbled to rubble. Even from a distance, the place appeared abandoned. No banners, no signs of life. The men of the Green Host stirred uneasily. They were within sight of Crow's Nest, but Rhaenyra's forces were nowhere to be seen. Otto began barking orders, forming the bulk of his soldiers in defensive positioning at the base of the slope. He did not intend to march the entire army into those broken walls, which might hide ambushers. Instead, a smaller detachment of knights, 40 men in total, as promised, prepared to ascend toward the keep, along with the king's litter and several heralds bearing white flags. Aegon watched from atop his dragon, noting how the wind tugged at those flags, as though uncertain whether to tear them from the poles. As the daylight waned, a distant horn sounded. A ripple of tension passed through the greens. Aegon strained his eyes and saw, Emerging from the line of trees to the north, a column of riders in black and red livery. At their head rode Rhaenyra Targaryen, unmistakable with her pale hair twisted into a thick braid. At her side was Prince Daemon, clad in dark armor. Behind them came knights bearing the banners of House Velaryon, House Celtigar, and various crown lands lords loyal to the queen. They rode forward at a measured pace, not brandishing weapons, allowing the white flags held by a few of their outriders to show clearly. Aegon guided his dragon downward to where Otto and Sir Criston were already conferring with each other. The king's litter remained closed. Perhaps Aegon II was preparing himself for this tense meeting. As Rhaenyra's force approached, the greens formed into a shallow crescent, parted in the center to reveal a small patch of ground for the parley. Aegon's dragon settled to one side, its massive bulk casting a looming shadow over the crowd. Without dismounting, Rhaenyra surveyed the greens. Her expression was unreadable from a distance, but as she came closer, Aegon noted the tightness around her mouth, the determination in her eyes. Daemon rode on her right, scanning the surroundings for the slightest hint of betrayal. Behind them, the chosen knights reined in their horses, and the rest of Rhaenyra's men spread out in a defensive arc. A moment later, the curtains of the king's litter drew back. Aegon II emerged, assisted by 2 attendants. He wore a robe of rich green velvet and a circlet of gold around his brow, though his face was wan and his posture stooped. One leg, heavily bandaged, dragged slightly. Even so, he refused the help of a 3rd attendant and managed to stand upright, eyes locked on his half-sister. Sir Criston Cole stayed a step behind him, watchful hand on his sword. The hush was profound, as though the wind itself had stilled. For a heartbeat, neither side moved, each waiting for the other to betray a hidden motive. Aegon took it upon himself to advance. He stepped between the 2 gatherings, black armor glinting in the last rays of sunlight, helmet dangling from his hand. "Let this be a gathering under truce," he called, voice resonant. "We come to seek an end to the war that ravages Westeros. The terms are clear. No weapons drawn, no harm to be done so long as words suffice." For a tense moment, no one answered. Then Rhaenyra dismounted, motioning for a knight to take her reins. She strode forward, chin high, cloak trailing behind her. Daemon followed with a measured pace, scanning the greens from the corners of his eyes. On the opposing side, Aegon II stood with Sir Criston Cole, flanked by Otto Hightower and 2 knights bearing his personal banner. All seemed reluctant to be the first to speak. Rhaenyra halted a few paces away from her half-brother. "You summoned me here for parley, Aegon." Aegon II's grip on his cane-like staff tightened. "So you claim. I see no reason to call upon you for anything, sister, save surrender. But this Conqueror insists that peace might be found." Rhaenyra's gaze flicked to the black-armored figure. "He made the same pledge to me. I decided to humor him, in the hope of sparing more bloodshed. If indeed you have a mind to discuss terms." The king's lips curled in something akin to a sneer. "My only terms are that you abandon your false crown and acknowledge me as your rightful sovereign. You and your children may receive clemency if you kneel." A ripple of murmured anger rose from Rhaenyra's knights. One stepped forward, hand on sword hilt, but Rhaenyra held up a single hand, stilling him. Daemon's eyes flashed, yet he waited for her lead. "My father named me his heir," she said, voice controlled. "The realm, most of it, recognized me as such. You seized the throne in the dark of night. If anyone here needs to kneel for mercy, it is you." The tension crackled like a live wire. Aegon glanced from one side to the other, sensing that if these 2 unleashed their fury, not a word could forestall a clash. He stepped forward again, raising his voice. "Enough. Let us not begin this parley with demands for bending the knee. Surely there's some middle ground before we unsheathe swords. I have seen the devastation wrought by your conflict. Entire villages destroyed, fields burnt. Winter creeps closer. Do you truly wish to let your people starve while you fight over a broken seat?" Daemon let out a scoff, but Rhaenyra gave Aegon a measured look. "You speak of unity, Yet it was not I who started this war. My half-brother crowned himself, forced my hand. I took what was rightfully mine, Aegon Sept. You were never my father's true choice. The lords of the realm know it. Mabur balked. Otto cleared his throat, stepping forward to diffuse the rising anger. Your Grace, we are here to see if there might be a negotiated settlement. The realm suffers. Perhaps a marriage might unite the lines, or a division of power. Rhaenyra's sharp laughter cut him off. You propose I marry my half-brother, or yield half my claim in exchange for hollow peace. I am no broodmare to be bartered, nor do I intend to preside over half a kingdom while he rules the other. The 7 kingdoms remain one. My father believed that. I will not see them split by your machinations. Madame Cerny. Aegon D's face flushed, though whether from fever or fury was unclear. I have no interest in wedding you, sister, nor in setting any portion of what is mine. It seems we are at an impasse. Aegon inhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. If these are your stances, unyielding claims of rightful sovereignty, then we accomplish nothing. Let me propose a different angle. The succession can be resolved by law, or precedent that both sides can accept. If you cannot agree on how the realm was inherited, perhaps you can share its governance until an heir emerges who unifies both lines. Netaper. Rhaenyra scowled at the idea. Aegon II's brow furrowed, as if the notion offended him just as deeply. Yet there was a moment, fleeting but present, where the suggestion seemed to hang in the air, stirring the imaginations of a few. Daemon, however, stepped forward, voice slicing through the hush. You think we can govern together, like a pair of co-monarchs, each doubting and resenting the other's existence? That is no solution. That is merely postponing the bloodshed. Newenten. I have to agree, Otto said reluctantly, though for different reasons. 2 crowned heads, each with a claim. It sets a dangerous precedent for civil conflict. The realm must have one king or queen. Rhaenyra's eyes narrowed, and she glanced at Daemon. The prince offered the faintest shrug, deferring to her but clearly unimpressed by the suggestions so far. Then it seems we come back to the same question. Who shall wear the crown? Before Aegon II could answer, a sudden swirl of dust rose behind the greens. An outrider arrived at a gallop, reining his horse with urgency. He spoke in hushed tones to a knight, who hurried forward to whisper something to Sir Criston Cole. Criston's face darkened, and he tugged at the lapel of the king's sleeve. Your Grace, he said quietly, there is trouble along the eastern ridge. Scouts report a company of men in black livery, possibly more of Rhaenyra's forces, moving into position behind the keep. They appear armed for battle. Rhaenyra shot Daemon a sharp look. You gave no such order? Daemon shook his head, eyes flashing with suspicion. No, this is not my doing. But we did not come alone into these wilds. Perhaps some sworn lord sees an opportunity. A wave of tension coursed through both sides. Aegon II clutched his staff, and Otto Hightower's mouth tightened. At once the hush threatened to dissolve into chaos. Aegon stepped between them, raising his hands to quell the rising alarm. You each vowed to bring only your retinue. If there are additional men gathering, it may be an independent force, or a misunderstanding. Let us not leap to violence. I will see for myself. He turned and walked briskly past the row of knights, ignoring the stares of both factions, and hoisted himself onto the black dragon's flank. The beast beat its wings with a thunderous rush, sending dust swirling across the ground. Soldiers ducked their heads and covered their faces. Aegon rose above the keep, scanning the rocky hills beyond. Sure enough, to the east, he spotted a cluster of men in black and gold surcoats forming up in a small dell. Some carried spears, others crossbows. He urged the dragon closer, descending carefully, mindful that crossbow bolts could fill the air if they took him for an enemy. As he drew near, he recognized the crest embroidered on a few banners. A golden lightning bolt on Black House Bar Aemon, sworn to Dragonstone originally, though their loyalties could be complicated. A tall man wearing partial armor and a ragged cloak stood at the forefront, barking orders to the others. He saw Aegon's dragon, and his eyes went wide. but he made no overt move to attack. Aegon landed a short distance away, the dragon's bulk stirring leaves and pebbles as it touched down. At once, several crossbowmen leveled their weapons, though they glanced nervously at one another. The tall man stepped forward, gaunt-faced, with a hint of desperation in his posture. "Who are you?" the man called, voice echoing among the stony ridges. "Speak, or my men will shoot." "I come in peace," Aegon answered, lifting his visor. "There is a parley between Rhaenyra Targaryen and Aegon II at the keep." "Why do you gather here with arms?" The man sneered. "We follow Lady Gaelbar Emmon. We came to ensure the Queen's safety. She doesn't trust the Greens to keep their word. She bade us remain out of sight, in case of treachery." He hesitated, gauging Aegon's reaction. "You appear to be no knight of hers, though. That armor, you're the one they're calling the Conqueror Reborn?" Aegon grimaced inwardly, seeing how swiftly rumor and legend travel. "If you have orders from Lady Gale, you must know that bringing a hidden force so close to the parley invites misunderstanding. Both sides grow jumpy, suspecting a trap. Stand down, or at least withdraw to a farther distance, so no one imagines you mean to ambush them." "None knower." The man's jaw set stubbornly. "We will not jeopardize the Queen. If the Greens turn on her, we'll be ready." Aegon exhaled, scanning the group. Perhaps 100 men, far more than the agreed-upon retinue. True, that number alone would not defeat the larger Green Army, but it could spark a bloody skirmish that would doom the parley. "Then at least send word to the Queen that you are here by her order. Let us avoid needless conflict. And keep your weapons lowered unless you see direct betrayal." "Nay." The tall man regarded Aegon for a moment, as though weighing his sincerity against the risk. Finally, he gestured to his men, and the crossbows were lowered, though not entirely put away. "We'll hold this position, out of sight of the main road. I'll dispatch a runner to the Queen." Aegon nodded. "See that you do. The realm hangs on a fragile thread. A single rash arrow could cut it in two." Without waiting for a reply, he nudged his dragon's neck, and the beast leapt skyward, stirring dust and broken twigs. He circled the keep once more, verifying that no other hidden forces lurked in the area. Satisfied there were no others, he descended to the parley ground, where the two Targaryen factions remained in a tense standoff. He could see that Rhaenyra, Daemon, Otto, and Aegon II had not advanced further in negotiation. They stood rigidly, arms folded or gripping canes. Aegon dismounted and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "There is a company from House Bar Emmon on the eastern ridge, come to ensure the Queen's safety. They will not attack unless provoked. They will withdraw farther, so as not to threaten this negotiation." Rhaenyra arched an eyebrow at Daemon, who gave her an exasperated nod. So it seemed even she hadn't known the exact timing or location of those reinforcements. A shadow of annoyance crossed her face, as though she was displeased with the overzealous action. Aegon II grunted, gripping his staff as if he might break it. But after a short silence, he spoke. "If they stay at a distance, then so be it," he said, weariness lacing his words. The exertion of merely standing upright seemed to sap his strength. He turned to Rhaenyra. "Sister, enough of this posturing. Will you yield your claim and spare the realm further bloodshed, or must we continue this war?" Rhaenyra's eyes flashed. "I am done with demands to yield. If you cannot accept me as the rightful queen, then at least step aside. Let us settle it by the laws of succession. Call a great council, if you have the courage. Let the lords of Westeros decide whose claim is true." A faint stir passed through those assembled. A great council was an ancient tradition, but also a risky one. Neither side would have full control over the outcome. They would rely on the lords to weigh their competing claims. Aegon II's lips thinned. "You think the realm's lords will favor you, despite the manhood that tradition demands in a ruler? You forget that our ancestors seldom crowned a woman." Rhaenyra lifted her chin. "Times change. Many lords have already sworn for me, men who see the wisdom of my father's decree. If the council chooses you, so be it. But will you submit if they choose me?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Aegon II's features. He was no fool. He knew that public sympathy in some regions favored Rhaenyra, particularly after rumors of how the Greens had hidden news of Viserys' death. But could he bear to risk the result of such a council? Before he could answer, Otto stepped in, voice polished, but firm. A great council would take time to assemble. Meanwhile, winter looms, and the crown's finances are strained. If the lords are forced to travel from all corners of the Seven Kingdoms, we may lose precious months, or even years, while the realm remains in limbo. And that is assuming all sides abide by the results, which is never guaranteed. Nana Kanan. Rhaenyra's glare turned on Otto. You want a swift resolution that favors your grandson. You worry that a proper council might strip him of the throne. Aegon II growled under his breath. He is my grandsire, yes, but I stand by my own claim. Do not speak of me as though I am a child in his pocket. Aegon moved carefully between them, holding up a placating hand. Let us not discard the idea of a great council so quickly. It is the fairest method, short of continuing the war or forcing one side's unconditional surrender. But if you both find it unworkable, I propose a short truce, a cessation of hostilities for a set period, during which a smaller council of your lords might gather here in the Crown Lands to discuss a binding compromise. Daemon rolled his eyes. A committee of lords picking over the scraps of a monarchy. This grows more absurd by the moment. You have a better idea? Rhaenyra asked him pointedly. Daemon opened his mouth, then closed it again, scowling. He shot a fierce glance at Aegon the Conqueror. What say you, Phantom King? You brandish lofty talk of stopping Targaryens from devouring each other. But the realm is already in flames. Aegon let out a slow exhale. My presence does not mend centuries of tradition in a day. Yet I know this. If you two cannot compromise, you will tear the realm asunder. The lords will choose sides. More dragons will burn towns to ash. The small folk will starve. What seat will you rule from if King's Landing itself is destroyed? Nay. Rhaenyra's expression softened for just a moment, the weight of her father's city upon her mind. She had seen the damage done in the streets, the fear that lingered among the people. Aegon II sagged against his cane, perhaps too ill to maintain fury. A hush fell again, and for an instant, all that was heard was the low moan of the wind through the crumbling keep. At length, Rhaenyra drew in a breath. Fine, D'Artois. I will agree to a truce, an armistice that halts open warfare, while we assemble a neutral council of lords to hear both claims and propose a settlement. Let it convene soon, within a fortnight. If no resolution is found by the next move's turn, hostilities resume. Nain. Aegon II stared at her, something pained in his eyes. And what if the lords side with me? Would you truly kneel? Rhaenyra gave no direct answer. Instead, she looked to Aegon the Conqueror. He speaks of a neutral arbiter. You claim you stand for the realm. Will you vow to uphold the council's decision, whichever way it goes? Memberi? Ento. Aegon recognized the trap in that question. If he said yes, he bound himself to an outcome that might be flawed or forcibly swayed by fear or bribery. But if he said no, he undermined the entire premise of seeking a peaceful resolution. So, carefully, he nodded. I vow to uphold a just decision, freely rendered by lords who are not threatened or coerced. But if treachery surfaces, I will not stand idle. Otto folded his arms. We must define who sits on this council, and ensure it does not turn into a farce. I propose we choose representatives from each region: the Vale, the North, the Riverlands, the Westerlands, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Iron Islands, and Dorne. Each kingdom's lord or lady paramount, or their chosen deputy. Rhaenyra lifted her chin. And the Crownlands? Otto paused. Perhaps you, or King Aegon, or both, might represent the Crownlands. That is a point requiring further discussion. For the moment, let us at least agree on the principle. A wave of murmurs rippled through the knights and lords on both sides. Some looked uneasy, others intrigued. A few were openly displeased, especially the fierce partisans who wanted only to press the war and see the other side crushed. But the majority recognized that a respite, however temporary, was preferable to further slaughter. With winter looming, few relished the idea of more campaigns in the cold and mud. Sir Criston Cole studied Rhaenyra's knights, measuring their reaction. At last he spoke quietly to Aegon II, who nodded. Otto and the Queen exchanged a final series of cautious glances. Then, Rhaenyra extended her hand toward her half-brother, not quite offering to clasp his, but rather waiting for some acknowledgement. "You will swear to keep the peace until the council convenes?" she said. Aegon's jaw tightened. Then, with visible reluctance, he lifted his trembling hand, ignoring the brace of support. Their hands touched briefly, not in friendship, but in a tenuous pact. Those assembled exhaled collectively, aware of the delicate line they now walked. "So be it," Rhaenyra said, letting go. "We gather here in 2 weeks' time. Lords will be summoned from each region. Until then, no armies are to engage. Let ravens fly from crow's nests with the seal of both claimants." "Manner so." Otto cleared his throat, signaling a herald who stepped forward with parchment and ink. Under the watchful eyes of both factions, Rhaenyra and Aegon II, each pressed their signet rings into a small wax seal, affixing the arrangement in writing. At any moment it could still crumble, but for now, it stood as a fragile beacon of hope. Once the seals were set, both parties drew back. Daemon escorted Rhaenyra to her horse, watching the Greens with open suspicion. Sir Criston Cole helped the king back into his litter, while Otto barked instructions for a messenger to ride to King's Landing and to the major seats of the realm. Aegon oversaw it all, relief warring with a sense of impending trials. They had secured a ceasefire, but bridging the chasm of animosity would require more than a few lumps of wax and a scrap of parchment. It was nearly twilight when both sides prepared to depart. Rhaenyra and her knights had further business. They wanted to enter the ruined fortress to see if it could serve as a meeting site in 2 weeks. Aegon II, drained by fever and pain, could not remain longer. His men carefully lifted the litter, turning it away from the keep. The rest of the Greens began their march back toward the main army. Aegon approached Rhaenyra one last time before she ascended her horse. Daemon hovered close by, glaring as if to dissuade any closeness. Still, Aegon inclined his head respectfully. "I hope this does not prove in vain." She regarded him, eyes shining in the waning light. "If we can prevent more bloodshed, it will be worth it. But, let me be plain, if the council favors my claim, I expect Aegon Dondelli's full submission. If he resists, I will press the war to its bitter end." Aegon nodded. "And if they favor him?" Her expression flickered with something unreadable. "Then I must decide whether to accept the realm's will, or prove them wrong by fire. But that is not a choice I care to make lightly." She mounted her horse, Daemon doing the same. The two led their band into the crumbling walls, leaving behind only the soft thunder of hoofbeats and the swirl of dust. Satisfied that no immediate hostilities would break out, Aegon returned to his dragon, which perched on a broken ledge of stone. With a deft motion, he climbed into the saddle and spurred the beast to flight. The Greens had already formed their column, the glimmer of torches bobbing in the dusk as they wound away from Crow's Nest. He soared above them, scanning the terrain for any sign of renewed conflict, but all seemed still. Housebar Emmon's contingent remained on the eastern ridge, presumably awaiting the Queen's commands. The Greens pressed westward. Aegon hovered a moment, gazing at the ruin below. Perhaps soon it would serve as the stage for a grand assembly of lords, each bearing the weight of a fractured realm's hopes. Night was almost fully upon the land by the time he caught up with the green host. Aegon circled overhead, keeping watch until they set camp in a small clearing sheltered by a line of hills. Soldiers lit fires and began the routine of preparing meager meals, huddled against the gathering chill. At the center of the camp, the king's litter rested near Otto's tent. Lanterns revealed glimpses of the king's pale face as maesters fussed over him, offering potions and bandaging. Aegon dismounted in the circle of torchlight and found Otto gazing anxiously at a map spread upon a small table. Sir Criston Cole stood close by, arms folded. At Aegon's approach, Otto lifted his tired eyes. "Though the Queen intends to remain at Crow's Nest for a short while," the hand said. "To plan for the upcoming council?" "So it seems," Aegon replied. She wants to ensure the place can host the lords who will gather. She might also fortify it to deter any trickery. Dan? Sir Criston frowned. We could do the same if we so chose. Perhaps establish a position not too far from the keep, to watch her movements. Aegon shook his head. That will only fuel suspicion. We agreed to a truce. Breaking it by placing your men too near would be unwise. Otto let out a sigh. You speak as though you are above these matters, yet you rely on our goodwill as much as we rely on yours. If Rhaenyra decides to resume hostilities, do you think your presence alone will stop her? Aegon set his jaw. I will do what I must. If either side breaks the truce, they will face me as well as the other. But for now, I sense Rhaenyra truly wants a respite. She knows the city can ill afford more fighting. Bah! Sir Criston regarded him warily. What if the lords at this council lean toward her? Will you defend the king's rightful claim, or allow them to name her queen unopposed? I will defend a just outcome. Aegon replied, keeping his voice level. But only if it is truly just. If threats or bribes warp the council's decision, that is another matter. Do not assume I will stand idle if you or the queen engage in subterfuge. Dandha. A tense quiet settled. Otto finally gave a curt nod, rolling up the map. Then let us hope subterfuge is not required. For now, I must see to the king's comfort. He suffers greatly. The hand departed, leaving Aegon and Sir Criston in the torchlit clearing. The older knight studied Aegon a moment. A century dead, they say, and yet you speak with conviction. If your purpose is truly to unite House Targaryen, I wish you luck. You'll need it. With that, he turned on his heel, following Otto into the shadows. Alone, Aegon stood in the flickering glow of the flames. Nearby, the dragon curled into a massive coil, letting out a rumbling breath that caused a few soldiers to edge away nervously. The hush of the night enveloped the camp, punctuated by the crackle of wood and the soft murmur of men talking in low voices. He walked toward the edge of the clearing, letting the darkness swallow him. A century dead, an echo that hovered in Sir Criston's words. Did he even belong in this time, or was he some vestige of a past that could never be fully reclaimed? Morning arrived with a brittle chill. Frost rimed the edges of the tents, and the horses stamped restlessly. Otto commanded that they break camp and begin the journey back toward the Crownland's strongholds, from which they could dispatch ravens far and wide. The letter bearing the official seal of both Targaryen claimants would accompany those messengers, calling for a council of lords to convene at Crow's Nest within a fortnight. Aegon flew ahead, ensuring the road was clear of ambush or sabotage. The uneasy calm held. He spotted no sign of Rhaenyra's knights, though he suspected they'd take a different route back to the capital, or remain at the ruins as she planned. By midday, the green column reached more familiar terrain, passing farmsteads that had seen better days but at least showed no recent sign of raiders. Peasants emerged hesitantly to watch the host pass. Some bowing, others staring in silent apprehension. As the day wore on, Aegon found himself reflecting on the fine line between monarchy and madness. The Targaryen name commanded awe, but it also conjured fear. Could the two claimants truly place the realm before their pride? Or would the council become just another battlefield, with words and threats replacing swords until someone inevitably drew blood? That night, they made camp near a shallow stream. The sky was thick with clouds, obscuring the moon. Aegon stood watch beneath the open skies, the dragon dozing behind him. From a short distance, he heard voices raised in argument. Men complaining that they should press forward, take advantage of the queen's willingness to negotiate, or else rally more allies to crush her. Others muttered that a pause in fighting was a gift from the gods. The camp was divided, a reflection of the realm's fracture. A few hours before dawn, the king's fever worsened. Word spread through the camp that Aegon Nasi was racked with chills, sweat pouring from his brow. Maesters frantically concocted new potions. Otto paced outside the king's tent, tension radiating in every movement. Sir Criston stood guard, face etched with worry. Aegon observed from a distance, remembering the sorrowful look in Rhaenyra's eyes. when she spoke of all that had been taken from her, her children, her home, her sense of stability. Perhaps the war itself, the weight of kingship, was devouring Aegon II from within. Still, he clung to the throne with desperate resolve. By dawn, the crisis passed, at least for the moment, allowing the host to continue onward. The rest of the journey back to the Crown Lands was slow, but free of clashes. At last, they arrived at a fortress loyal to the Greens. A sturdy keep of gray stone near a crossing of roads, smaller than the Red Keep, but sufficient for the king to rest. Otto wasted no time in summoning scribes and ravens, dispatching letters to every great house of the realm. Aegon watched the flurry of messages with guarded optimism. They carried the official seals, along with a written promise of safe passage for any lord who came to Crow's Nest. Yet he knew that even as those ravens took flight, the future remained as murky as a starless night. Some houses had suffered losses and might prefer to remain neutral. Others harbored grudges and would arrive with vengeance in their hearts. And still others might see in this council an opportunity to rise in standing, cunningly manipulating the outcome. Meanwhile, the fortnight would pass swiftly. Both sides would muster as though for war, ready to respond if the council's decision displeased them. The specter of betrayal loomed over every plan. If one faction suspected they lacked the votes, might they orchestrate an attack beforehand? Or might a cunning lord sabotage the meeting, hoping to force the war's continuation? Weary from the weight of it all, Aegon sought a moment's solitude outside the fortress walls. He found a crumbling watchtower at the edge of the courtyard, ascended its narrow steps, and emerged onto a small parapet. The wind was sharp, ruffling his hair. Below, the bustle of men and horses continued, tiny figures in a swirl of purposeful chaos. A faint drizzle began to fall, misting the stone underfoot. He let his gaze travel across the rolling countryside. Somewhere beyond those hills, Rhaenyra was making her own preparations, gathering lords loyal to her cause, marshaling resources to prove the strength of her claim at the forthcoming council. And, in the other direction, men and women from all corners of Westeros were now on the road, spurred by ravens bearing the invitation, lords from the Vale, from the north, from the Stormlands, and beyond. He pictured the cold eyes of Lannister knights, the proud banners of Highgarden, the fierce seafarers from the Iron Islands. Would they come willingly? Or would they arrive braced for more strife? He closed his eyes, remembering a time, if memory was truly his, when he and his sisters had flown across a divided continent, forging alliances with Dragonfire and the promise of a new order. It had been brutal, yes, but it had forged unity. Now, all that unity threatened to unravel, undone by a single family's civil strife. Perhaps no one man or woman could hold it together forever. A footstep on the stair made him turn. Otto Hightower appeared at the top of the tower, leaning heavily on the parapet. The drizzle dampened his robe, and droplets clung to his whitening beard. He studied Aegon in silence for a moment, as though uncertain how to speak to this strange figure, who claimed a name out of legend. "The king improves," Otto said at last. "Slightly. The maesters believe he'll be able to travel to Crow's Nest in time." Aegon nodded. "Good. It would strengthen the credibility of the council if both claimants are present in person." Otto let out a weary chuckle. Credibility? That is a novel concept in war. Still, if it keeps swords sheathed, I'll not complain. He paused, tapping his fingers on the damp stone. "You should know that among the lords we are calling, some remain steadfastly loyal to the Greens. Others, less so. Even if the majority favor Rhaenyra, we could see a precarious standoff. Nobody wants to commit first. That is why the neutral lords matter. If the Tullys, Arryns, and Starks attend, their judgment could sway the rest." Otto sighed. House Stark might not come at all. Winter encroaches upon the north, and they have their own concerns. As for the Arryns, they're still reeling from recent conflicts. The Vale might send an emissary. The Tullys remain uncertain. Some might blame both sides for the Riverland's suffering. Aegon stared at the horizon. "It matters not. We must attempt it. Even a partial gathering is better than none. If enough of the great houses speak with one voice, the smaller ones will follow. Otto regarded him, a flicker of skepticism passing across his tired features. I've lived many years, served many kings. I've never believed the realm could be guided by goodwill alone. Power, fear, advantage. Those are the driving forces. This talk of unity you bring. It's admirable, but I fear it is naive. It may be, Aegon conceded, but my first conquest was called folly, until it wasn't. Sometimes, one must risk folly to achieve the extraordinary. Otto gave a soft, mirthless chuckle, the drizzle soaking into his beard. Then let us see if this extraordinary peace can bloom from the ashes of war. They stood there for a while, each lost in private musings as the soft rain pattered on stone. At last, Otto turned away, muttering about the need to oversee supply lines. Aegon remained, listening to the quiet pulse of the raindrops, contemplating the fragile ceasefire he had coaxed into being. The days that followed blurred into a pattern of waiting. Ravens flew in and out, bearing replies from scattered lords. Some pledged to attend, others gave excuses or voiced skepticism. Rumors trickled in. Some said Rhaenyra was gathering allies at Dragonstone, ready to strike if the council turned against her. Others claimed the Greens were negotiating a secret alliance with the Lannisters to ensure the king's victory. Every whisper added tension to the air. Aegon spent much of his time on the ramparts, or patrolling the skies on his dragon, ensuring that no hidden foe massed on the horizon. Now and then, he ventured into local villages to see how the small folk fared. Most were weary, suspicious of any soldier, and they eyed him with equal parts awe and fear when they glimpsed the black beast overhead. He did what little he could to reassure them, but talk of a parley meant nothing to hungry bellies and barns burned to cinders. In the end, they wanted only peace, or at least a respite from the incessant demands of warring lords. Finally, the appointed time drew near. The Greens, led by King Aegon II, began their slow march back toward Crow's Nest, wagons laden with food and tents for the lords who would gather. By prior arrangement, the Queen and her retinue had done likewise, establishing a rudimentary camp within the ruined fortress, clearing rubble to create a space for an assembly hall. News came that some lords had already arrived or were on their way. Lord Jasper Wilde from the Stormlands, the aged Lady Anya Waynwood representing the Vale, Lord Tully's envoy from Riverrun. There were even rumors of a Stark bannerman braving the roads to speak for Winterfell. Aegon flew above the column, scanning the horizon for trouble. The land felt solemn, as though bracing for some great event. Each farmhouse, each hedgerow, stood silent under gray skies. He spotted crows circling a distant field, perhaps feasting on remains from an older skirmish. In all directions, the scars of war lingered. He only prayed that the council would not unleash a greater catastrophe. When they reached Crow's Nest again, the Greens found it transformed. Canvas pavilions had sprung up around the ruined walls. Wagons from various houses cluttered the roads leading in. Banners of all colors and sigils hung limp in the drizzly air, black and red for Targaryen, green and silver for the rival Targaryen line. The Fish of Tully, the Falcon of Arryn, the Golden Rose of Tyrell, the Crossed Keys of Rosby, and many more. Even a small contingent bearing the flayed man of Bolton had come, traveling a great distance from the north, though no Stark flag was yet in sight. Curious onlookers, squires, minor knights, servants, milled about in tense clusters, gossiping about the confrontation to come. Amid this swirl of color and heraldry, the stone bones of Crow's Nest loomed stark and ominous. Parts of the fortress had been partially repaired with timber and hastily laid stones, enough to house those who dared sleep within its battered walls. A large courtyard had been cleared, ringed by torches with rough wooden benches and tables arranged to serve as a makeshift hall. Guards patrolled every approach, some bearing the Queen's livery, others the King's, still others belonging to this or that noble house. The combined effect was a taut hush, each faction watching the others like hawks. Aegon landed in an open space near the fortress gate, stirring the gathered crowd to quick retreat. Otto arrived at his side with a contingent of knights, helping Aegon II dismount from a horse-drawn litter. The king's face was drawn but resolute. Sir Criston flanked him, one hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Together, they made their way into the heart of the fortress. each step echoing across the courtyard's worn cobblestones. Within the courtyard, an elevated platform had been erected, lined with wooden chairs. At its center, two seats of equal height faced each other. One was draped in black cloth, the other in green. Between them stood a single, simple table bearing a ceremonial hammer, presumably meant to be used by the presiding mediator. If indeed they found one. Clusters of lords and ladies already lingered, some whispering anxiously, others standing stiff-backed with arms folded. Rhaenyra was there, dressed in black, trimmed with gold, gazing across the courtyard as if assessing every angle. Daemon stood near her, scanning the crowd with predatory focus. A handful of her closest allies, Lord Valerion, Lord Celtigar, were in deep conversation. Each time a new arrival was announced, heads turned. So it began. Over the next hour, more lords arrived or emerged from the tents outside, stepping in to claim seats or positions around the courtyard. A tall figure in brown and gray was introduced as an emissary of House Stark, though not the lord himself. Lady Waynwood took a seat with a retinue of Vale Knights. A slim man representing the Tyrells quickly found a spot on the edge, fanning himself as though the tension alone made the air thick. The Tully envoy muttered that his lord was delayed but might yet come. A hush descended as the king and queen took their respective chairs, black and green. There were no cheers, no calls of "Long live the king" or "Long live the queen." Merely a collective intake of breath at the sight of two claimants facing one another across a table. Aegon the Conqueror lingered at the foot of the platform, neither behind the king nor the queen, a living question mark in the drama unfolding. The hammered sun overhead was hidden behind cloud, diffusing the light into a grayish glow. At length, Otto Hightower stepped forward and addressed the gathered lords. "My lords, my ladies, we come together to resolve the crisis of succession that plagues the realm. By the agreement of both claimants, you are called to witness and counsel. Let no man or woman threaten violence here, or the entire realm shall suffer." "Madai," Rhaenyra spoke first, calm and clear. "I have the rightful claim, named by my father, King Viserys. I stand before you prepared to demonstrate that my cause is just. Let those who question me speak openly." Aegon II, pale but with a spark in his eyes, answered, "I was crowned in King's Landing by those who heard my father's final decree. The realm acknowledges male preference in succession. I too am prepared to prove my right." The watchers exchanged glances, hushed murmurs rising. Some of the lords rubbed their chins, others looked askance. It was obvious that old grudges and alliances seethed beneath the surface. Aegon, standing off to one side, could almost feel the swirl of agendas. This gathering could be the realm's salvation, or its funeral pyre. At length, the supposed mediator, a rotund man wearing the sigil of a local Crownlands lord, stepped onto the platform to set down a ledger, presumably to record the arguments and any votes that might follow. A hush settled. He cleared his throat nervously, greeted the claimants, then gestured for the council to commence. And so began the grand attempt to settle a war not with swords, but with words. Each lord or envoy rose in turn, some praising Rhaenyra's virtues and the late king's wishes, others citing tradition or the uncertain nature of Viserys' final hours to bolster Aegon II. Tempers ran high. Voices rose. Daemon glowered at any who spoke against his wife, while Otto made pointed remarks about the dangers of ignoring centuries of precedent. The discussion was at times thoughtful, at times rancorous. More than once, Aegon the Conqueror had to step forward and gently remind them of their vow to seek peace, not provoke more bloodshed. But even as the council made halting progress, it became clear that entrenched positions would not easily yield. Some lords were open-minded, willing to weigh the evidence. Others appeared to have marched in with minds made up. The emissary from the Stark seat listened intently, rarely speaking. Though each time he did, it was with deliberate gravity. The Tully envoy seemed distracted, perhaps uneasy about the plight of his own land. Lady Waynwood pressed for clarity on what would happen if both claimants died without a recognized heir. The Tyrell man fidgeted, politely proposing that the council break for a meal, which nobody seemed to want. Rhaenyra spoke passionately about her father's letter, the oath many lords swore to her as heir. Aegon II retorted with a vow the same lords had made to respect male preference, citing the Great Council of 101 AC that had once denied a woman's claim. And through it all, a subtle wave of tension rippled back and forth. As if the very air braced for the moment arguments would fail, and swords would from scabbards. Hours passed, and darkness began to fall. Torches were lit around the courtyard, bathing the ruined walls in flickering orange. Rain started again, a cold drizzle that seeped through cloaks. Still, the council continued, with no firm conclusion in sight. Some suggested an official vote, but the king demurred, wanting more time to present documents or gather evidence of his father's final words. Rhaenyra's faction insisted the matter could not drag on, or the truce would be imperiled. Aegon the Conqueror stood watch throughout it all, heart weighed by the magnitude of what hung in the balance. If words failed, the realm would burn. He could see the frustration brewing in Daemon's eyes, the weariness in Aegon II's drawn features, the resolute pride in Rhaenyra's posture. It was a tapestry of conflict woven too tightly to unravel easily. At last, the rotund mediator declared a recess to resume at first light. The lords and ladies dispersed to their tents, some departing in heated whispers, others in weary silence. Guards maintained a watchful perimeter, half expecting trouble to erupt at any moment. Aegon stepped away from the platform, letting the chilly rain wash over his face. He found his dragon perched in one corner of the courtyard, half sheltered by a broken tower. The beast's golden eyes reflected the torchlight, an ancient sentinel in the gloom. Aegon stroked its flank, letting the warmth of its scales combat the dampness creeping into his bones. In the corners of the fortress, green-cloaked guards eyed black-armored knights, each suspicious of the other. Rhaenyra lingered near the dais, her cloak heavy with rain, speaking quietly to Daemon and Lord Valerion. Otto and Sir Criston conferred in another corner, presumably discussing how best to rally the uncertain lords. The hush felt ominous, as though a single spark might set off a conflagration. Slowly, Aegon moved away from them all, seeking a place to collect his thoughts. He found a narrow side passage, once part of an inner hallway, now open to the elements where the ceiling had collapsed. The rubble offered some partial shelter from the rain. He leaned against a broken column, head bowed, reliving the day's arguments. Perhaps one more dawn of debate would yield a resolution, but only if enough lords swayed one way or the other. And even then, would the losing side truly accept the outcome? Footsteps echoed on the wet stones behind him. Aegon turned to see none other than Daemon Targaryen step into the partial shelter, water dripping from his dark hair. The prince regarded Aegon in silence a moment. When he spoke, his tone was measured, though still laced with that underlying tension. You've done much to bring this council together. I wonder if you imagine yourself a hero, forging peace with a noble gesture. Aegon met Daemon's gaze steadily. A hero? Hardly. I'd do what I must to spare our blood from annihilation. Daemon approached closer, arms folded. Perhaps. Or perhaps you manipulate us as you once did the ancient kings of this land. Was that not how the original conquest succeeded? Subdue some with fire, win others with cunning? Neither. Aegon's mouth tightened. If I manipulated you, I'd have let the war continue until both sides were too exhausted to resist me. That's not my aim. I only want the Targaryen line unbroken. Daemon exhaled, glancing aside. Unbroken. You say that while half of us plot the Uther's downfall, dreaming of revenge for this or that slight. He shook his head. Still, I acknowledge what you've tried to do. If this works, Rhaenyra will owe you a debt. And if it fails, Daemon's eyes narrowed, then all debts are paid in blood. You will have to choose a side, or watch as dragons tear each other to pieces again. Not to stay. He turned on his heel and stepped back out into the rain, leaving Aegon alone with the echoes of his words. The night wore on with a heavy gloom, and Aegon realized that the conflict he sought to heal ran deeper than crowns and titles. Pride, vengeance, old wounds. These could not be solved by a single council session. Yet he had not come this far to abandon hope. He spent the remainder of the evening in restless thought, pacing the courtyard and occasionally checking on the uneasy clusters of guard. Each time he passed a group, they fell silent, eyeing his black armor with an odd mix of awe and trepidation. More than once, he heard a soldier murmur, "The Conqueror," as if naming a figure from myth. In truth, he felt neither conquering nor triumphant, only burdened with the knowledge that if these negotiations collapsed, a monstrous war would resume. At dawn, the lords reconvened, bleary-eyed and tense. The drizzle had not abated, soaking cloaks and dripping from helm crests. Torches hissed and sputtered in the damp air. Rhaenyra and Aegon II took their seats again, flanked by their principal supporters. Once more, the mediator called the assembly to order. Over the next several hours, proposals were made, rebuffed, rephrased. The Tully envoy suggested a compromise in which Rhaenyra reigned as queen and named Aegon II her official heir, if she produced no further children. That spurred a heated rejection from Daemon. Otto tried to propose alliances sealed by marriages, which incensed Rhaenyra's faction. The Tyrell representative yawned behind a polite hand, inquiring about the potential distribution of bread and grain to Highgarden if the war ended. On and on it went, a labyrinth of half-measures and fleeting alliances. Aegon the Conqueror hovered at the edges of the gathering, stepping forward now and then to calm tempers, or remind them of the truce's delicate nature. Behind him, his dragon waited, an ever-present threat, or promise, of swift devastation if the meeting failed. More than once, he saw an undercurrent of fear flicker in the eyes of certain lords. Fear of dragons was old as the conquest itself. Yet ironically, it might also keep them from drawing swords too hastily. As midday approached, the mood turned bleak. The debate looped around the same points. Rhaenyra's supporters insisted on her father's named succession. Aegon I's side clung to male preference. The weaker-willed lords began to fidget, glancing at the skies or the exit. Some had grown hungry or exhausted, or both. The mediator's ledger filled with contradictory notes and half-considered motions. At last, Rhaenyra rose from her chair, the black cloak swirling around her boots. "Enough. I see no further purpose in going around in circles. The realm cannot wait while we haggle over trivialities. Let us call a formal vote among the great lords present. Let them declare their support openly. If a clear majority emerges for one claimant, the other must abide, or prove themselves forsworn. A ripple of excitement and anxiety coursed through the courtyard. This was the moment many had dreaded or anticipated. Aegon II, face taut with pain, clutched the arms of his chair. Otto muttered something urgently in his ear, but the young king shook his head. "So be it," he rasped. "Let them show their loyalty. We shall see who truly follows the rightful sovereign." So the lines were drawn. The mediator cast a nervous glance at Aegon the Conqueror, who nodded in silent affirmation that they should proceed. One by one, each house would be called, and their representative would step forward to declare for Rhaenyra or for Aegon II. Some might choose neutrality, but that was unlikely. Neutral lords would find little love from either claimant. The hush was absolute as the first name echoed across the courtyard. House Wild of the Rain House. A portly lord with watery eyes stepped forward. Trembling slightly, he cast a glance at Rhaenyra, then at the king. His mouth opened, closed. Then he bowed to Aegon II, citing tradition of male heirs, though his voice shook. Next, House Celtigar. An older man with a crimson cloak and a crustacean sigil advanced. "We have ever been loyal to the Black Queen," he said firmly, declaring for Rhaenyra. He did not even glance at Aegon II. A cheer rose from Rhaenyra's corner, quickly stifled. So it continued, each house swearing for black or green, tension ratcheting ever higher. House Rosby's representative sided with the Queen. House Staunton hesitated, then bowed to the king. The Tyrell envoy, after much pompous clearing of his throat, declared for the Queen, citing the alliance with House Velaryon. Boos and jeers erupted from some corners while Rhaenyra's supporters offered polite applause. Then came House Tully's envoy, who stepped forward slowly. Everyone knew the Riverlands had been ravaged by war, and Tully loyalties had wavered. The envoy licked his lips. My lord regrets he cannot be here in person. He has instructed me to support Rhaenyra Targaryen. Another small cheer rose. Aegon the Sea's eyes flashed with anger, but he held his tongue. Next was the emissary from House Stark, or rather, the man sent by them. He was tall, spare, with gray in his beard. He declared that Lord Cragen Stark saw no reason to break faith with King Viserys named heir. But he was not fully empowered to cast a final vote. They leaned toward Rhaenyra, but withheld absolute commitment until they had a pledge that the North's concerns would be addressed. Even so, it was effectively a vote for Black, edging the count further in Rhaenyra's favor. The tension soared. Otto glared at Rhaenyra, while Daemon smirked triumphantly. But more houses remained. The Westerlands were not yet represented, nor the Stormlands in full. Some lesser Crownlands houses quietly spoke for the king, trying to redress the balance. But as each name was called, it became increasingly evident that Rhaenyra was gathering a majority. Aegon the The's face paled further, sweat beading on his brow. Finally, the mediator tallied. Though not every great lord had arrived or been accounted for, the trend was clear. More had thrown their weight behind Rhaenyra. The hush deepened. Rhaenyra's eyes lit with an almost painful hope, while Aegon II slumped in his seat, breathing heavily. The question loomed. Would he accept the result? Otto sprang forward, voice slicing through the hush. This is incomplete. The Lannisters, the Baratheons, and others have yet to weigh in. How can you claim a verdict? Rhaenyra's voice rang out, echoing off the damp stones. We invited every major house. If they chose not to come, they forfeit their voice. We have a majority among those who are present. Dem? Aegon II began to rise, leaning on his cane, face contorted in pain or fury. His lips twisted, and he spat words bitterly. This is not justice. I see only a gathering of those you've bribed or threatened. A murmur of outrage spread among the Black faction. Rhaenyra clenched her jaw. You gave your seal to the invitation, Aegon. You agreed to abide by a fair vote. Do you retract your oath? Aegon the Conqueror watched carefully. Stepping closer to the dais, ready to intervene, the young king swayed, seeming close to collapse. Sir Criston tried to steady him, but Aegon II pushed the hand aside. I do not accept this travesty. Rhaenyra strode forward, hand near the hilt of her belt knife. Daemon moved with her, as if anticipating a violent confrontation. The courtyard tensed. Archers fingered their bowstrings. Knights shifted their stances. You swore a truce, Rhaenyra hissed. You demanded a council. Now that the votes go against you, will you cast aside your word? Aegon III's breath rattled in his chest. He looked around, seeing no friendly faces beyond Otto, Sir Criston, and a few loyal lords. The majority of the Watchers appeared ready to proclaim Rhaenyra queen. Slowly despair flickered in his eyes, mingled with stubborn pride. He lifted his chin. Then kill me now, if you must. I will not kneel. Silence. Even Rhaenyra seemed taken aback by his raw refusal. Daemon's hand hovered near Dark Sister, but the queen reached out to still him. On the dais, the black seat and the green seat stood in fraught contradiction. A single spark could unleash chaos. Aegon the Conqueror stepped between them, voice low but firm. We agreed to abide by a just outcome. If you believe the process incomplete, name which absent lords we must await, and let them be summoned swiftly. Show good faith that you do not seek to defy the council. Otto seized on that. Yes. Let the council remain open. The Lannisters, the Baratheons, the Arryns in full. Only then can we declare a final verdict. Rhaenyra's eyes narrowed. They've had time to come. Why should we wait longer when the majority here have spoken? Aegon turned to her, voice urgent. If it is truly the will of the realm, waiting a few more days or weeks will only confirm it. Have patience, or you risk giving your half-brother cause to claim you forced a hasty decision. Let no man say this result was rushed. She glared at him, fierce frustration burning in her eyes. But slowly, she exhaled. Fine. If the realm needs further time, I grant it. 2 more weeks. Send new ravens. But in that time, no more stalling. If the absent lords do not appear, they forfeit their voice. Aegon II wavered, leaning on the cane. Otto nodded quickly, seizing the compromise. Then we are not done. The truce stands until that time. A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled lords. Some looked relieved, others frustrated. The queen cast one more long look at her half-brother, then pivoted on her heel and strode away, Daemon at her side. The king sagged into his seat, exhaustion plain on his face as Otto and Kristen conferred urgently with him. Aegon stood among the watchers, the strain of the day etched on his features. This was far from a decisive peace. They had merely delayed the final confrontation. The lines were drawn, the majority favored Rhaenyra, but Aegon II refused to yield. More lords might arrive, or might not, and the realm's fate remained suspended like a sword in midair. Another fortnight to gather uncertain voices, another fortnight for old grudges to harden. And still, the dragons loomed, the eyes of the realm watching for any sign of betrayal. Aegon could only hope that in this fragile extension of time, a final compromise, or a decisive vote, would emerge before the simmering tensions erupted into unstoppable war. He walked to his dragon, placing a hand on its flank, feeling the life and power thrumming beneath the scales. How much blood would be spared if unity prevailed? And how quickly might that blood be spilled if it failed? Rainwater trickled down the dragon's hide, dripping onto the stones. All around, knights and lords whispered. 2 weeks more, and the realm would see if the flames of civil war could be snuffed out by the faint glow of reason, or if the conflagration would burn ever brighter, consuming all in its path.